know you want to do it that second.
Being the time is 5 p.m., I will call this Committee of the Whole meeting of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board for May 28th, 2025 to order. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Elper.
Present.
Commissioner Forney. Absent. Commissioner Menz.
Here.
Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Commissioner Rucker.
Here.
Commissioner Schaefer. Here. Commissioner Thompson. Absent. Vice President Musich.
Present.
President Abeni.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. The agenda is before us. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. I'll note that Commissioner Thompson's joined us, and Commissioner Forney will not be here tonight. With that, we'll go right into the agenda. This is our second meeting regarding our 2026 budget. And with that, I'll turn things over to Superintendent Bangora.
All right. Thank you, President Abeni and Commissioners. It's great to see everybody here today. We'll jump right into this and we'll get started. So I first want to make sure I thank you all for the work and the information that was shared in our first budget retreat on 4/30. And we did great work. That information shared along with the work we'll be doing this evening, of course, will provide really guidance as we work with staff to develop the 2026 budget. So some things I want to share. So the 2026 supplemental budget development, a little bit of an overview around this. So to remind everyone again, the adopted 2026 budget plan serves really as the foundation for this year's budget process. Thank you. Move the screen, right? That'd be good. We will continue to update the financial projections, as you will see during the property tax discussion this evening as we work through that. And as you all know, we've talked about the uncertainty and with the budget pressures that we're facing, no new departmental requests will be considered in our process as we work through this. This is the final year of the 2023 to 2026 strategic directions, making it really critical to align with the remaining efforts and available resources, especially in this year with the potential for significant cuts that we're looking at. So today, this evening, we have really a packed agenda for all of you, a lot of work that we're going to have to do today, so I look forward to it. We'll start with the overview of the other MPRB funds that you will see. Director Pilger will provide an update on the Stormwater Fund. We will next have a presentation from Director Arvidsson, Weissman and Pilger on our various capital improvement programs that we'll share. After the break, we'll continue our discussion and really gain additional input on revenue with this board. We'll also then begin pre-planning for the recreation impacts that we'll be facing as an organization. And then finally, we'll discuss and obtain direction, of course, on the maximum property tax levy from this board. So by the end of today's session, there are some key information that's needed from you as our commissioners. The input and guidance for the development of the 2026 budget and the direction for the MPRB maximum property levy request from this board. And, just wanted to say, as we face really this challenging budget this year in the cycles ahead of us as we work through this, sustaining our park system will require really strategic and intentional collaboration together as we work through this. I'm really confident that the board and our dedicated staff and team, their competence will be successful in really navigating this really challenging time together. And it's not going to be easy, but I know we can get through it. And really to continue to deliver really exceptional services for our residents of Minneapolis and our community. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Director Weissman, and thank you for your time, and I look forward to our conversation. Sorry. Well, never mind.
Welcome, Mr. Rosen.
President Bene and Commissioners, at the first budget retreat, we were focused on the general fund. I'm just going to give a brief overview of other funds, budget, and 5-year projections. So I'll start with the special revenue funds. So these funds account for revenues with specific purposes. So things like donations, park dedication, O&M lottery, Teen Teamworks grants, O&M that funds the natural areas budget are held in special revenue funds. And you'll see there was federal funding in there in 2024 that was for tree planting. That has ended. Then we look at the expenditures. The wages and fringes for the natural areas budget. Operating equipment is for other areas. And really, a lot of these budgets are just placeholders, and it's adjusted through the year as the actual donations are known. So you can see in this 5-year projection, the grant and dedicated revenue fund doesn't change, and that's really the budget that gets adjusted through the year, each year, when the actual donations come in and revenue comes in. The natural areas budget is more of a set budget, and you can see there's a plan in 2026 for increased funding and increased expenses, which will be staffing, more certified staffing. The next fund we'll look at is internal service funds. So internal service funds provide services kind of within the park board. They include information technology, equipment, which is like mobile equipment, trucks, log loaders, those types of things, and self-insurance. So the revenue you see here is paid for by park board departments. And the expenditures in the internal service funds are for the staffing and the operating and equipment, which includes software, equipment replacement, computer replacement, workers' comp payouts, and insurance premiums. So when we look at the 5-year projection for the internal service funds, these are the 3 areas I was talking about. It's mostly just based on inflationary increases, but you will see self-insurance is increasing by a larger amount in 2027 and 28, and that's for expected workers' compensation changes that are increasing expenses. Information technology has a small increase in 2027 for security and door access program that's been phased in. And when you see the negative net income in information technology, that has been using a small amount of fund balance to replace network components. The next fund to look at is the enterprise fund. So this is enterprise fund revenues. So enterprise activities should be self-supporting. So they should make enough revenue to pay their expenses. And these revenues are from user fees, parking, commissions from vendors that do activities in parks. And the expenditures of the enterprise fund are just paying for those activities. The biggest expenditure is staffing. They also pay for improvements. So we have that improvements line. That's replacement and rehabilitation of amenities in the enterprise fund. And the transfers to debt service, the bottom line there is Parade Ice Garden debt from the renovation of Parade Ice Garden. So that's what's paid for by the enterprise fund. And this shows the 5-year projection for the enterprise fund, and we've really just built in kind of inflationary increase on revenue of 2.5% for most of the operations, which does not keep up with wages and benefits and other expenses. So there's declining net income in the out years. So as the budgets are built, 2026 budget and future budgets, there will be fee increases brought forward, adjustments to expenses to try to maintain or increase net income for all of these areas. And these are just more areas, something like vendor agreements, concessions is increasing in net income. That's because revenues far outpace expenses, so it's able to increase net income. So this shows your enterprise fund net income, what that is used for. So capital improvements is the biggest line. And you'll see under debt service, the Parade ICE debt service is getting smaller and then ending in 2029. So what that will do is free up more funds for improvements, replacement, and rehabilitation, as long as no new debt is taken on. And the last fund to look at is another enterprise fund. It's a stormwater fund that started in 2024. The stormwater funding comes from a fee on Minneapolis utility bills. And there is a plan for 2026 to increase the revenue, which would fund more staffing and operating costs. That's part of this 5-year plan, and Director Pilger is going to do a presentation on that next, so I will let her speak to these. So I can take any questions on any of the funds, or Director Pilger will
Other
give her
questions?
stormwater presentation.
Other questions for Mr. Rosen? I have a question, and I'm going to ask it even though I probably should know the answer, so it's kind of embarrassing. But I remember in college there are no stupid questions or whatever. But the parade, debt service on the parade stadium, how did the park board actually take on that debt? Through bonding through the city? And, okay, I'm seeing nodding back there.
President Benny, yes, it goes through the city and the Board of Estimate to issue our debt.
Yeah. But it's debt that the park board is assigned, the debt service is assigned to the park board. Other debt on behalf of the park board related to like NPP 20 or something like that, it's rolls into the city's debt. So how is it determined that the park board has a line item of debt that we're responsible for? Do you know?
President Benny, I believe it was because it was in the enterprise fund, and the revenue from Parade Ice Arena was kind of the backing for the bonds.
Yeah.
For the debt.
I see. So if we developed a concept to have, and I'm just spitballing here, but another enterprise fund venue with debt based, so then, okay. I don't know if we talked about that a little bit with, I think, the Northeast Ice Rink maybe being decommissioned. I see Commissioner Menz, please.
Thanks for asking that question, and thanks for recognizing me, President Benny. I'd like to know a little bit more about that too. And is that the only place that we have debt service, or where are other examples of how, is this a unique debt service with the city, or is it common in other parts of the budget?
President Benny, Commissioner Menz, we have the debt for Fort Snelling, and that was part of the enterprise fund, but it was moved to the CIP. So that is another debt we have. I can
With the state?
the Fort Snelling debt is actually internal debt. The same as this in this year, 2025, we have this Minnehaha refectory debt the last year to pay that off, and that is the self-insurance fund has a large balance, and it will lend money internally. So the enterprise fund is paying back the self-insurance fund.
President Abeni and Commissioner Menz, I would just add to what Paul is saying. In our charter, we have the ability to also obtain commercial debt, so mortgages. And an example of that is the headquarters building. When we wanted to procure and create the headquarters building here, the city refused to, well, first the mayor vetoed our purchase because they didn't want to take a riverfront property off of the tax rolls. And then they vetoed. Yeah, so.
Taj Mahal right now, if you didn't know that.
Yep. So we ultimately took out commercial mortgage in order to procure this building, which we then paid off after 5 years, I think it was, with general fund excess fund balance. And the debt for the enterprise fund is because the enterprise fund is self-supporting, no property tax dollars are used for the enterprise fund. So anything that is operated out of the enterprise fund, we each either have to finance through cash or debt. When we went to the city to obtain the parade ice debt, we had to work with the BET and city and show that we had the ability to pay it off. So just like we would go to a bank or a mortgage, we had to go to the city for their approval to issue the debt for the Parade Ice Garden. And of course, also our board had to approve the request for issuing that debt.
Thank you. I know we have a couple, I think 5:20 is the next agenda item, right? So I'm not like preventing us from staying on target. I'm wondering also, this might come at a different time, but how is it possible, or is there ways for us to leverage the commercial building or space that is Northeast Ice Arena for additional dollars because the ice is going to be the issue of this budget, it appears. So how are we going to figure that out? And can we do that utilizing the resources we have, taking on other debt, or figuring that out as a board?
President Abeni, Commissioner Menz, in order to take out a commercial loan, and Council Rice can correct me if I'm wrong, it has to be a new building. We can't like take out a mortgage on a pre-existing building like the headquarters. We couldn't take out a loan against the headquarters and use it to upgrade something else or even upgrade this own building.
But I guess my question is it possible for us to sell or dispose of a certain property, gain income from that disposal, and utilize that income in combination with a commercial mortgage to acquire a different facility that may be more adequate or long-term for that use?
President Abeni, Commissioner Menz, I believe that would be doable.
Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, probably another question I should know the answer to, but so our agreements with like our vendors and restaurants, do we get like a cut of the profit, like a percentage cut? Is it the same for every vendor, or is it different depending on each agreement?
Commissioner Abeni and Commissioner Olson, I believe it's specific to that vendor agreement, and it is a percentage of what they make.
Okay, and it's like over like a decade or something like that, and then we can maybe revisit it or something like that. Okay. All right, thanks.
Some are as short as I think 5 years. Oh. Sorry.
President Abeni, Commissioner Olson, Commissioners, the most typical amount is 12%, and we gather that on an annual basis. That includes all food and beverage that we are able to collect that on. There's going to be actually for Awamni, we'll be bringing forward a revised agreement with them where we're trying to right-size the amount of revenue we're getting in context to the type of business that they're running and kind of the price points of the food and service that they're providing there. So, but for the most part, it's pretty much 12% across the board.
12% of sales, not of profit, right?
12% of sales, correct?
Thank you. Okay, I think we can keep going here. So here comes Ms. Pilger, Director Pilger.
Just want to make sure I know how to advance the slides. So good evening, Commissioners. Tonight, I will be updating you on the MPRB's work to expand the stormwater management program, and I will share the staffing model that we've created for the expanded program. I'm also going to highlight some of the operational budget implications associated with the expanded program. So I will walk you through a brief review of the current program and the expansion of the program that we need to do. I'll walk you through our consultants' gaps analysis, stormwater staffing research on peer organizations, the new stormwater staffing model, and a very high-level 5-year operational budget to support both the staff model and the stormwater programs. So as a refresher, the MPRB's most recent stormwater program had 2 distinct programs that operated out of environmental management, which is the department that I oversee. There was a stormwater and lake monitoring program in water quality and a stormwater public education program in environmental ed. These were really strong programs that operated well, and they helped both us as the MPRB and the city meet our federal NPDES permit requirements related to monitoring and education primarily. And we were spending approximately $750,000 annually to execute these 2 programs, and these programs were funded through a reimbursement process with the City of Minneapolis from the city's stormwater utility funds. And then through efforts by this Board of Commissioners, MPRB staff, City Council and city staff, the Park Board began receiving some direct allocations of stormwater utility funds from the City of Minneapolis in 2024. And the money was intended to expand our stormwater management program and improve our compliance with the federal permit, of which we're the co-permittee. And that was one of the funds that Paul was just referencing in the Stormwater Enterprise Fund. So in order to have a much more complete stormwater program and be in compliance with this federal permit, we really need to expand our stormwater program to include all of the elements shown here in the Venn diagram. So this is a significant increase in our responsibilities associated with stormwater management and permit compliance. We're shifting from performing strongly in 2 areas to becoming compliant in all areas. And we see this expanded program putting us in a position to really take ownership of our compliance and our stormwater infrastructure management. So the MPRB commissioned Young Environmental Consulting Group in 2024 to evaluate the MPRB's existing stormwater program in several areas. We looked at staffing, budget, permit compliance, asset management, and other areas. The assessment was intended to pinpoint needs and information gaps in the stormwater program and propose enhancements to help us meet all the elements in the Venn diagram. So this slide is a summary of the gaps analysis that Young conducted. It really represents our most critical gaps. There's a lengthy report on the gaps that we have in our stormwater program, but these are kind of the highlights. In multiple areas, we have significant data and information gaps. We have missing and incomplete ownership and maintenance data, and it makes it really challenging to develop budgets for our operations and our capital program. There's also significant gaps in our lack of plans and procedures, documentation, records, condition assessments especially, associated with our operations and maintenance of the storm sewer system. And this is really critical information that we need to be able to manage our infrastructure. We also have some inspection programs that are gaps in the organization, including erosion control, post-construction management, and pollution prevention. So these gaps, along with some stormwater staffing research that I'll highlight in the next couple of slides, really help form the basis for the stormwater staffing model I'll share with you. So the current staffing level was evaluated by Young Environmental along with the compliance gaps, and it was compared to similar organizational structures to build a comprehensive staffing model for us. Young Environmental identified 5 peer entities to the MPRB and collected information on their structures, their staffing roles, what were the scale of the budgets, and how did they use professional services for their program implementation. What we discovered in our work with Young was that there were clear parallels in the roles that were needed for successful stormwater management at the MPRB. The peer organizations we looked at really demonstrated that it was important to have specialized positions for compliance, for public education, for field operations, and for technical support. So based on those models and what our current water quality work unit structure here is at the MPRB, this is the model we are building within the organization. And there are some hiring timelines associated with the model, and this is really a visual representation for you of the new water resources and stormwater staffing model unit and that hiring timeline. So you'll notice on my left side of the screen, there's a monitoring track, and on my right side of the screen, there's a stormwater track. That monitoring track is existing positions that we already have. They're the ones performing our stormwater and lake monitoring. And the stormwater track on the right would be all new staffing. So the orange highlighted boxes represent new staffing. The yellow position in the middle is the elevation of an existing position into a water resources and stormwater program manager. So that is an existing program position that exists. So we see this program continuing to operate in the environmental management department and expanding the work of this whole water resources unit. So I do want to emphasize that even though I didn't share a lot of the details of the peer organizations and all of the research that was done into this building the model, there was a significant amount of research done. There was a significant amount of vetting and discussion. And we also really were trying to balance being fiscally responsible in the creation of a model and making sure we are able to still meet all of those permit needs, be compliant, and expand our program, but looking at where do we have current strengths, where do we have gaps, what do we need to build. So we do think this structure here would really put us in a strong position for stormwater management, and ultimately that leads to improved water quality for everybody in the city. A couple more things I'd like to highlight tonight, just takeaways for you. So the hiring timeline for the next few years associated with this program is shown on the screen. We're in year 2. We consider 2024 year 1. That was the first year of our dedicated funding. In year 1, we had the $1,324,000 that Paul highlighted. In year 2, our funding did grow. It's on the next slide, the exact amount, by like $32,000 for an inflationary increase. And with that funding, in 2025, we have the capacity to hire a stormwater compliance lead, and we have the capacity to hire a stormwater education coordinator. We do not need any new funding for those positions as long as we can maintain an annual allocation. In year 3 of the program, in 2026, this board approved a funding request last fall for an additional $359,000 in order to both increase dollars for the program, increase professional services, and hire an additional staffer shown here as a stormwater specialist. So we have requested this additional funding from the city of Minneapolis. We put that request in February, and we're still waiting to hear whether it's been approved. We've had some back and forth with sharing some information, more details, answering some questions. And I also wanted to give the board a highlight tonight that we do plan to continue to build out the staffing model in 2027. We need to continue to build in another stormwater specialist and some more seasonals. But being that it's budget year 2027, we're going to have to figure out how to handle that increase request with this board, given we're on this 2-year budget cycle. But Julie's confident, here's Julie, that we can figure out a process for the board to go through in order to review that request and give it approval. And then the last slide is similar information to what you saw on the last slide, but it's more of a very high-level operational budget overview for the first 5 years of the program. And you can see where year one was 1,324,000. And then year two is where we are now, and we've gotten an inflationary increase. And that money, again, being focused on doing some additional hiring, building some programs. And then in year three, again, hiring a stormwater specialist, hiring seasonal support staff, increasing our programs. And that, if we are granted that $359,000 request, we will be able to move forward with that hiring, and that would take us to a total annual budget for the stormwater program in 2026 of over $1.7 million. You know, year four and year five are a little less certain than years 1, 2, and 3, but we would envision, as we said, continuing to build out that stormwater specialist role, hiring our second one, and continuing to hire seasonal staff. So there's still some gaps in timing because we're on these weird budget cycles where, you know, this board approves in the fall, then we request in the next year with the city. But we're working through some of that. We're trying to figure out what these funding requests should look like and what the cycles should be. So with that, I can take any questions you have on the expansion of the program or information presented.
Thank you.
Sure.
Vice President Musich.
Thank you, President Abeni. So we have now built out approximately how we intend to grow the team that's going to be doing this work. At what point do we anticipate we will have enough information about our existing infrastructure and its condition to be able to start understanding what our capital needs related to repair and replacement of that infrastructure will be?
So I'll be doing a high-level overview during the capital program tonight.
Perfect.
To talk
Then I'll
about
wait for that.
Stormwater CIP, and we can talk about it maybe a little bit further then, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Menz?
Thank you. My question is regarding, I serve in the MWMO, and I know that their staff and their, the board has approved them looking at their BMPs that they've created in the past and seeing how they're doing and, you know, evaluating it. It seems like similar work that we're building out. And I think that there is definitely capacity for both of our organizations to do that. What I'm wondering is how are we planning for that direct collaboration with that partner? Do we envision certain projects, including both MWMO stormwater and Park Board stormwater? I'm wondering how we're gonna clearly define the roles of the watersheds and then our role in the stormwater. I don't know if that's an appropriate question right now, but it is definitely something that's.
Sure, we could talk about that some right now. So we have been working in collaboration with Mississippi Watershed Management Organization for a number of years to figure out who has kind of what responsibilities associated with operations and maintenance of some of these partner projects, like Columbia is a partner project. There are many other partner projects we've done with them over the years. And so we are in those conversations about who has what responsibilities. We've also been talking to them about partnering on a youth project. They came to us a few years ago because a lot of people in the stormwater business are looking for people to take care of the stormwater BMPs and kind of building that staffing. So the MPRB's actual youth employment program, which is in environmental management, is actively working with WMO to try to build some skill sets within our youth employment program. And we had a team called GRIT last year, Green Infrastructure Team it was called, and they went out, and I think that some of that funding came from WMO and some came from our youth employment program, and they were out doing like BMP inspections, doing different reports and other things for us. So there's a couple paths going on with our partnership with them.
Great, thank you. I just, as we build that out, I'm just hopeful that we can make sure to, and I know that there's a public education component, how those organizations work together, especially with Graco right in between us. There's so much opportunity for that stormwater education piece.
Yes.
And I don't see that necessarily budgeted in there, but maybe that's part of the stormwater specialist positions.
It's actually, I'll show you, just so you know, that on the, under the stormwater track, there's a stormwater education coordinator.
Thank
And
you.
that would be
Yep.
really exciting for us because we do not, this would be a full-time year-round position. And right now, our water quality education is happening through a lot of seasonals, and they're doing a really good job, and they're going out to events, and they're tabling. And we'd still want to have some of that seasonal tabling, but having a dedicated year-round staffer would give us that opportunity to build those partnerships with both WMO, and work in more partnership with the city also.
And the schools. I mean, I think that as we look into our future meeting today about revenue, there's a possibility for a lot of revenue with curriculum development and school trips down to those spaces where we can be having those spaces be active even during the days. There is a lot of demand for that, and I think that if we build it out, it would be really revenue generating and connecting of multiple organizations.
And I think you're right on, and we're doing that up at North Mississippi Nature Center. We have a lot of camps up there. We have school trips, you know, we're right on the river, and it has been, since we took back over the operation of that facility, we've been able to grow those programs for ourselves, so it's a great example.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Yes, I was just curious if you could give me just a broad definition of what these stormwater compliance leads specialists would be doing. What would be their general job description? And then does the city have some of those same type of positions as well?
So the stormwater compliance lead would really be focused on compliance and making sure that we're meeting the conditions of the permit, like making sure that we are out actually doing inspections of our BMPs and recording them, having them be part of our reporting, making sure that we're doing the internal practices that we need to do with like our good housekeeping on all of our properties that we own, and especially at our operations type facilities. So really compliance focused. Then the stormwater specialists would probably be more GIS focused for us and in the field doing inspections and having those skills to be able to record information in real time and bringing it into our program. And then also just assisting with whatever work needs to be done in the program to, you know, there's a lot of reporting that happens within this federal NPDES permit. There's a lot we do within our own organization. So both of those positions would have roles with reporting and some of the monitoring also, and special projects. I mean, we're hoping that we can get to a point where we can actually do some water quality improvement projects, and we would utilize some of these staffers in different elements of those projects, whether it's grant applications, analysis, helping to run those programs. Does that help?
Yes, it does. I would just make sure that we ramp up as we have the need. That would be my feedback. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think this is excellent, and I think that nothing, not to, contradict you, Commissioner Schaefer, but I do feel that the need has been there for a while, so we're ramping up as fast as we can and responsibly. I'm, using Della Young and her firm to do the analysis to say what's needed, and then this incremental path to building up the staffing. I think is really responsible, and I'm excited that it's happening. Also, to the comments about the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, those partnerships are really important, but we have also 3 other watershed districts in the city, and there are different agreements and different ways of interacting with each of the organizations that need to be tracked, and agreements need to be put in place and things like that. So it's a lot of work to manage this infrastructure, but at the end of the day, I do feel that I think you're on a great path, and I think this will really, really result in some significant focus on water quality. So thank you. Thank you for that very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, with that, we're moving through to the capital improvement programs section, and Mr. Arvidsson, Director Arvidsson is coming.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Adam Arvidsson, Director of Strategic Planning. I'm here to talk about the Capital Improvement Program, specifically for the Capital Projects Fund. We kind of have a trio of capital improvement programs that we're going to talk about tonight. This section that I'm going to do, Director Weissman will talk about the Enterprise Capital Fund, and then our new Stormwater Capital Fund, which again, Director Pilger is going to come back up and talk a bit about that. So my portion of the presentation, I'm just going to do a brief overview about the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, and how we pull that together. As required by ordinance, I want to report to you on evaluations of the equity metrics that we do annually, and then I'm going to talk about the neighborhood regional capital programs and touch on park dedication briefly at the end. So just really quickly in terms of timeline, because our capital improvement program is a bit of an odd 6-year window. Many agencies do 5. We do 6 because we have to interact with the city's process later in the year, and they start a lot earlier than we do. So right now, we have an approved 2025 through 2030 capital improvement program that you all approved with the budget in December of 2024. So moving through the year, this year, we do have the budget workshop, after which sort of in the July-August window, we do an update of our equity metrics. So the underlying metrics behind both the regional and neighborhood capital programs are updated each year. That happens in July, August, because new census data typically comes out about that time, and we need that to update the metrics. Until that time, we can't do it. We do some staff engagement during that time period as well. And then in September, October, we prepare the CIP for what in this case will be the 2026 to 2031 year. And that goes for the neighborhood and the capital, the neighborhood, the regional, the rehabilitation, and also enterprise and stormwater. And this is important because once the board adopts that capital program alongside the budget, that feeds into the city's following year of approvals. The city has to approve anything that we bond for, so the entire NPP 20 program to date has gone through the city's Capital Long Range Improvement Committee, or CLIC. So we have to submit official capital budget requests to the city. They will be starting next year early on their 27 through 2032. So we have to have at least a 27 year and onward in order to satisfy them. And so when you hear about the stormwater capital plan this year, I think you'll hear that we might not be ready to do allocations of capital in 26, but we do need to do that stormwater this year so that we have a 27 year and can start to get in the pipeline, so to speak. Once the board approves those projects, once the board approves the next CIP, then officially those 2026 projects can begin. So even though we do have 2026 projects in our CIP now, they're technically not authorized until they become the inmost year. And then those projects begin when a project manager can be assigned based on staff capacity, and then we do community engagement, we scope out the project. It usually takes a year to get through design and community engagement, and then construction happens the following year. So when we talk about CIP years, just remember that those are funding years. Those are not build it in the ground, open to the public years. So in general, we try to create as stable a CIP as we can. I know that my view and the view of most of the organization here is that the CIP and the budget is in some way a promise to the community. We try to not change that too much from year to year. So projects that are already in the CIP, we really try not to alter them. There are usually alterations in each year. We have to do that, but we try to change as little as possible, regardless of an updated equity score. So if a park drops way down in its equity score, we do still leave that park alone in the CIP. We don't want parks blipping in and out of the CIP constantly. New parks are always placed in the outermost year so that we don't disrupt and delay already planned projects. And then we also don't tend to give parks additional allocations. The intent of NPP 20 was to go through the entire list of parks before reinvesting. And so we're working our way through, and once a park gets an NPP 20 investment, it won't again, except under special circumstances. And then project delays, when we have to make them, are determined by the current equity rankings. So when we update those rankings, if we have to make a delay, that park's current ranking is what drives that. So with regard to our equity metrics, you've all been around a little while, you kind of know what they are, so I'll keep this short and sweet. We're not proposing any changes to the regional nor the neighborhood equity metrics this year. So there have been some years in the past where we've brought forward, in one case, a fairly significant modification to that ordinance. We're not proposing to do that this year. We think things are functioning fine. we've really moved into what I like to call the second tier of NPP 20. Our first tier were the parks that had very high rankings based on their community characteristics. We focused improvements largely across the north side and the upper south, and we are now seeing a set of parks that are scattered all over the city and which have very tired facilities and have not seen investment in some period of time. And that's why parks that maybe don't pop to mind in terms of equity, like Kenwood and Armitage, are starting to come into our CIP because those parks have not seen significant investment and those facilities are getting a little tired. So again, we think that's an indication that the metrics are working and we don't need to make any changes at this time. So with regard to the neighborhood capital and rehabilitation program, I just want to note that in 2025, right now, MPRB and the city are renegotiating the NPP 20 funding amount. As required under ordinance every 5 years, we take a look at that to see if inflation escalation needs to be applied. MPRB, through Director Weissman, has submitted a proposal to the city for a 4% annual increase, which would actually start in 2027. You can see the numbers down below, which is our current amount. 2026 was the last year of the previous escalation. And so without an ordinance change, we'd be locked into that 13.115 annually. And you can see in the blue numbers what our proposed/requested amount would be. One thing it's important to note in advance of you seeing the CIP is that when we delayed the entire CIP to accommodate additional funding for North Commons, we did not escalate those projects because it would have wreaked havoc with the baseline totals. So if we are successful in getting an escalation increase, the first thing that will need to happen is many of those projects will need to escalate up 1 year in their funding amounts to make sure that they have full funding. And then after that, there may be a possibility to add additional projects to the CIP, depending on, again, where those escalation factors fit in. Just a quick reminder, within the Neighborhood Capital and Rehabilitation Program, there's kind of two big sections. The capital projects are park-specific projects. They typically involve either new assets, brand new things like skate parks or maybe pickleball courts that we don't have many of in our system, but they also do significant replacements of major assets like wading pools and playgrounds and sometimes athletic fields. In fact, that section does include our play area rehab program, which is a little bit of a misnomer that it's up in the capital and not the rehab, but it's because those are park specific. We're saying exactly which playground we're going to do based on the condition of that playground alone. There's no flexibility for staff to change where that money is going from one park to the next without a board approved amendment. So for instance, we have Lyndhurst Park in 27 and 28 for plan implementation. That money will stay there no matter what unless you act otherwise. The total allocated in the current CIP for that section of the capital is $66.5 million, which is the same amount as the previous 6-year window also. On the rehabilitation side, the money lives in 11 different fund categories. So this involves replacement and improvement of existing assets. So we wouldn't build anything new. We would repave a court. We would fix a roof. We would upgrade lighting. And then there's a lot of staff flexibility within these funds to go where the asset need is greatest. Now, we don't spend roof money on HVAC or we don't spend pavement money on lighting. So there's some governors around it, but in general, where that money is in the system is typically determined by staff. For example, there's a line item for roofs in 2026 for $602,000. That's how much we're going to spend on roofs. In the 25 to 30 CIP, that's $24.8 million total allocated, which is a slight increase from the previous 6-year CIP. And that slight increase is about the escalation number. The escalation number went all into rehab. So just to throw some numbers at this, you can see the top line is the NPP 20 capital that we get from the city. We match that with capital levy. So we have direct taxation dollars that are in the capital program. So there's a total capital section of, you can see that that number varies, but 10.6, 11.1, and then a total rehab number just below that also in the bold. So the percentages that you see down there below are the percent of that capital total that's being used in the rehab funds. Let me be really clear. Some of the money in the capital side is still doing rehab, but the explicit rehab funds range from that 43% to 35%, depending on the year. On the regional side, we have three main sources, and I'm going to take these apart and talk about them quickly. Parks and Trails Legacy is the most stable source of funding we have. That comes from the constitutional amendment. It's paid for by the sales tax. You can see that we estimate what that number is going to be based on past performance of the sales tax, and generally we get pretty close. We usually get a 2-year window from the Metropolitan Council. You can see in 2026 we overshot a little bit. In 2027 we undershot by almost exactly the same amount. So usually, though there's a little bit of fluctuation across a 6-year CIP, the Parks and Trails are pretty stable. Lottery O&M allocations are maybe trending a little bit upward, but this is on a reimbursement basis. So we don't change the CIP until we feel like consistently we're getting more money. The board would choose on staff recommendation to up that number if we felt that we were consistently getting higher reimbursements. In the lottery O&M, in the CIP, we also have both park-specific projects that we do. So like Columbia Parkway trails, we know we're going to do trails in Columbia Parkway, we're going to rehab those. But then we also have some general rehabilitation funds. And you can see the number breakdown there and how it varies. 2026 is the final year of a period of time where there had been an increase in trail rehabilitation funds specifically, and in 2027, at the moment, that's kind of resetting back to what has been the historic proportion between park-specific and general rehab. The most volatile of the state funding sources has been the bonding. Regional park bonding has been low or non-existent. Sometimes it's been allocated in non-bonding years. Add to that the Met Council only bonds when the state does, and only ever at a 2-to-3 match. So it's not like the Met Council's got X dollars and we're hoping for state money. The state money affects the Met Council money. We have historically built the CIP based on getting a $10 million allocation for the regional system from the state of Minnesota. And that breaks down to us getting a much smaller than $10 million amount, but we've based it on that. That has not happened consistently over the past 6 years. So what you see here on the chart is a bit of a look back. You can see our estimate on the top, the 3.72 every other year. And you can see in 2021, the state was way under that. In 2023, the state went to 0. In 24, they overbonded. That was the modernization money and all the extra stuff. But then again in 25, it could very well be 0. So cumulatively, we're only $42 million behind across 5 years. But I've highlighted in yellow the 3 times we've had to completely reconstruct the CIP in order to accommodate that volatility. So this is maybe my big message for the board this year, is that we need to think about a different way to address state bonding in our CIP so that we are able to consistently keep some kind of promise to the community about what we're going to do with the state money. We're constantly changing it right now, and I'm getting kind of uncomfortable with that. So this year we're going to be looking for a new methodology to approve regional park bonding. We're going to probably consider the actual timing of legislative appropriations because our budget year and the state budget year are different. We may not base this on a $10 million estimate anymore. It's possible that we're going to consider more asset-based programs similar to rehab funds that could flex with actual allocations. So let's say there's a trail fund, a restrooms fund, a shoreline fund. Maybe that works better. We don't know yet. And maybe it's something where we have to kind of under-promise during the budget approval in hopes of over-delivering later. And you may all recall when we got a whole bunch of additional modernization money, Deputy Superintendent Ringgold did lead a process to converse with you about how we were going to allocate all that money sort of mid-year. So I think it's time to probably be realistic about what the state is doing with bonding and to adjust our CIP to address that in the future. And I'll be convening a team to be discussing that. And then lastly, park dedication, some quick stats. Remember, we have 86 neighborhoods. That means 86 different pots of money. Mergers of neighborhood organizations notwithstanding, the ordinance still references the neighborhoods that are official in Minneapolis. Since 2014, $39 million have been paid. This board has allocated 60% of that money, and 14.2 million of that 23 are actually completed projects, so in the ground, open to the public. And that has also taken place in 76% of all the neighborhoods in Minneapolis. So we're trying to spread it around. We're trying to touch everybody here. Notwithstanding that, standalone park dedication projects are challenging from a staffing standpoint. We're already at the edge of being able to implement the full CIP each year, and doing new projects with park dedication is difficult to do. So we try to add things onto existing projects and be judicious about new ones. And we tend to propose allocations only in the forthcoming 26 and maybe 27 years, because beyond that, it's too volatile. Those numbers are moving all over the place. So that's a pretty narrow look in the CIP. With that, a breathless tour through the CIP, through the Capital Project Fund CIP. And before we move on with enterprise and stormwater, do you have any questions about any of this?
Okay, thank you, Director Arvidsson. Any questions? Okay, I don't see any, so
all right.
Welcome back, Director Wiseman.
I just have a brief overview of the Enterprise Fund CIP. So this is the CIP that was adopted last year, and it includes 2025 through 2030. And like the larger CIP, we have capital investment projects, and then we have rehabilitation categories. And so you can see those going forward. So for 2026, we will be looking forward to initiating a Columbia Golf Course chalet building envelope project. We're expecting that to be a larger project where it would be funded over a 2-year period of 26 and 27. And then in 2027, we have the plan for the Worth Golf Course parking lot redesign and replacement. At the bottom, the total, you'll see that the total progressively gets larger between 2025 and 2030. And I'll go back to Manager Rosen's presentation with the parade debt phasing out. We are shifting those dollars into the capital program going forward. So that's why those increases are there. Any questions on that before I move on?
Commissioner Alper.
Thank you. Yes, I'm wondering, when you say Worth Golf Course parking lot redesign and replacement, which parking lot?
I believe that it's a cohesive, the chalet
Okay.
parking lot.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. And now I'll welcome back Director Pilger.
So good evening once again, and as you heard in my previous presentation, we are really operationalizing a more complete stormwater program for the MPRB. And I'm excited to announce that we're also starting to plan for the establishment of a CIP program. And we're at the very, very beginning stages of a CIP program, so I want to set the stage a little bit. But tonight I would like to walk you through the history of the funding of the stormwater program, talk about some of the current challenges and uncertainties we're facing, but also share some work in progress on those. I would like to share some proposed CIP categories that we've put together for you to review. We also have some ideas for some initial phasing of a stormwater CIP program. And then at the end, I'm hoping that we can have a discussion on those CIP categories and some potential ways to prioritize both the categories of a CIP and then possibly projects within a CIP. So, as a reminder, I'm going to give you a little bit of stormwater funding history. In the late 1990s, the Park Board received its first annual reimbursements from the city for direct monitoring expenses that we had in association with stormwater monitoring, and that was stormwater monitoring only. That went on for a number of years, and then in 2010, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board and City Council directed staff to come to an agreement on stormwater monitoring, and we had picked up doing education after the late 1990s also for water quality education, and we entered into our first year of formal agreement in 2010. And then from 2010 through 2023, we're entering into annual agreements between the MPRB and the City of Minneapolis, really around work in three categories: that stormwater monitoring I mentioned earlier, lake monitoring, and stormwater education. And then a big step was taken in 2024, where the Park Board was included in the city's stormwater utility ordinance. And that allowed the funding to really start addressing some of our MPRB's maintenance and regulatory compliance around stormwater in an operating budget. Now in 2025, the Park Board and the city are working together to figure out how the funding of the new programs fit into the ordinance and into the budget cycles. And I wanted to highlight for this board that there was a resolution that you passed. This was a really, really big step for the stormwater program. That was resolution number 55 last year that led to the eventual outcome. I guess it was 2 years ago now, 2023 this was passed, and then in 2024 the City of Minneapolis Code of Ordinances were updated to have the MPRB be shown as a separate line item, as you can see here in the stormwater bill. And there was another Code of Ordinance update to have language that allowed funds to be paid out of the stormwater fund directly to the MPRB. So that was a really big piece. In the past, we had been on a reimbursement, we had been in annual agreements. This was a really big step for our organization. That resolution also got us that first direct allocation of the $1.324 million in stormwater fees to us directly. Previously, our annual reimbursements had been up to like $800,000 max. So that was a big step, and as I mentioned earlier, we are currently working with Minneapolis on a 2026 budget request, and again, all related to us, this board passing an ordinance to pursue those stormwater utility funds. So really, one of the goals in accessing those fees was to help us really build our own stormwater program, a much more comprehensive program, and a program that will be in compliance with our permit, will help us to do water quality improvement projects, and also to access some dollars for capital projects in the future. So tonight I know we're focused on capital, so in terms of the capital program, some of the next steps we're working are creating these categories for the program. We want to talk about prioritizing capital requests and then how we determine funding needs. So currently there are a few challenges facing us as we build this expanded both kind of stormwater operational program and budget and a capital program. We do need a capital funding stream for stormwater and water resources projects. Right now, there's not a process for a capital program defined in the ordinance. Our plan is to use the same types of processes as we do with other capital programs with the city, and we haven't gotten any indications that that would be problematic. So we're planning on moving forward with some stormwater capital dollars. We also do not have the access for increasing stormwater utility funds is not really well defined, that process. We don't really have a clearly defined process. We don't have defined timeline, but we're working on that also. Another challenge is that ownership and maintenance responsibilities for us as an organization, especially with shared assets with the city of Minneapolis, are not fully defined. We do know what assets in the system are clearly ours, but there's a lot of gray areas where ownership and maintenance responsibilities are not clear, and we are working on that. And then we also lack condition assessments, and that will be a big piece for us as we build a capital program and even as we build our operational program. But there is a little good news. There is work in progress towards a couple of these items. We have an ownership and maintenance team of city staff members and MPRB staff members. We have some folks from planning and our environmental management department from the MPRB working with surface and water sewers at the city of Minneapolis to develop a matrix of who is responsible for what for shared assets. When I talk about a shared asset, I'm referring to the fact that a lot of the MPRB's lands and stormwater infrastructure receives city stormwater runoff, and we consider that to be shared when it comes together. And so we're trying to figure out who would be responsible to maintain those assets, who would take over ownership of that, and that will have a really big impact on what our capital program actually looks like. We're several months into this work. We're trying to wrap it up in the next couple of months. There is some question around easements and how easements will be handled with this, being that a lot of these assets are already in existence. So we're talking through some of that with the city. We also have a JPA under development. Deputy Superintendent Jennifer Ringgold is leading that process for us, along with a small staff team and working with the City of Minneapolis Department of Public Works. And that is where we will be laying out a process for annual operational funding requests, and we will be laying out a process for requesting CIP funds. As part of the JPA, easements will be a piece of this in figuring out how we address easements with these shared assets on our property. So, shifting to potential CIP categories, we've been doing some kind of thinking and brainstorming and recognizing we need to create some categories. So our initial kind of blush here of categories are the 5 that you see on the screen. For discussion tonight, we'd like you to consider these categories. One would be a combined sewer overflow or CSO category. It's also called a rain leader disconnect program. One would be a lake water quality improvements category. Another would be restoration and resilience. Another would be implementation of stormwater regulations. And then a 5th one could be stormwater infrastructure, major rehab and reconstruction. So at this point in time, we're considering making a request to the City of Minneapolis for stormwater CIP funds related to those CSO dollars for 2027. So that's what you would be seeing this fall when you're working on budget adoption. Some of the advantages of that are really it's the most defined category of those 5 that we've proposed. We could build it into projects that are already happening, and it is a definite need. There's also some possibilities for some cost shares in some of these CSO projects or rain leader disconnects. The lake water quality improvement projects could be prioritized based on work that's happening under an MOU the MPRB is in with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District and the City of Minneapolis. Implementation of stormwater regulations would fund projects needed to comply with local regulations and state and EPA regulations. And then this stormwater infrastructure and major rehab reconstruction category is where you would see those more large-scale individual projects. Some of this mirrors what the city has for categories. It's not exactly what the city has, but the stormwater regulation category they have a CSO category, and then they have a few other categories. So we'll talk about these in a couple slides, but as you consider these, know that we could build this list out over the years. We could add categories, we could change categories. We're just really kind of looking for a starting point. And then there may be some that get prioritized based on funding opportunities, like Commissioner Men's mentioning, Mississippi Watershed Management Organization as a potential partner. We do a lot of partnering with Minneapolis Creek Watershed District and some of the other watersheds. So when developing the CIP, it will be important for us to consider how the projects within it are prioritized. So this slide shows you some potential prioritization parameters for a stormwater CIP. And at the end of the presentation, we can talk about whether these are the right categories or not, or whether they're the right priorities. Right now, the ones for discussion we're putting up are things that we are seeing issues with, like condition and safety, public health, water body impairments. Maybe there's a possibility to add value to other projects that are already planned through this CIP. And I also wanted to mention that we do definitely foresee an equity component being part of this prioritization, but it's probably going to look different than what those matrices are for the neighborhood program and the regional program. It's just, they're not necessarily the best fits for this work. We've been having some very, very initial discussions with planning about what we could maybe look at as a way to consider usership, and kind of, I think Michael's term was the walk shed, or the use shed? Effect shed of like how far reaching are these stormwater areas that are being impacted with the capital program. So potential CIP phasing could be to begin with these CSO rain leader disconnects. We're seeing this as definitely kind of a phased development of a program, given where we are with knowledge of infrastructure or lack of knowledge of infrastructure. The board could choose to initiate this stormwater CIP this fall with those CSO project, and then really phase those projects out over time as they get addressed and as we build our knowledge and our prioritization of the other programs. So we still do need some time to create some of these metrics. We are still building our staffing around this, and we need to better understand some of the needs with the CIP, but I guess we would recommend starting with CSO as an organization. And so, put a couple questions up for the board to consider about, and I can put the categories back up about, are there the CIP categories that we are missing that we should consider? I'd really love to hear from the board on that. I'd really like to hear us talk about, are we missing anything in that prioritization diagram? What other priorities could we consider? And this is kind of just our beginning.
Okay, thank you. Vice President Musich.
Thank you, President Abeni. Thank you, President Abeni. You had mentioned that there's a working group right now between the Park Board and the City of Minneapolis talking through a responsibility matrices and understanding who's responsible for what and how those things can be addressed. Is part of that conversation around shared areas, including the damage being caused to our natural environment by infrastructure owned by the city that's dumping into assets that we're responsible for example, Minnehaha Creek, the lakes, etc. An example of this would be where they've increased the size of an outlet pipe, but done nothing to harden the shoreline opposite that within Minnehaha Creek. So we're seeing huge amounts of erosion and our trails falling into the creek as a result of infrastructure improvements that are preventing the flooding of neighborhoods, but now causing environmental degradation.
So most of the stormwater ownership and maintenance matrix is focused on kind of the infrastructure needs, the above ground, the below ground, the BMPs out in our system that are handling stormwater. We've had those conversations at a staff level with the city about our concerns about the impacts of when changes just like you described happen and we see resulting effects. But at this point right now, our focus with that matrix has been on who is going to be responsible for maintaining that infrastructure, replacing that infrastructure, doing the condition assessments, doing the inspections, helping to meet our permit requirements. So we've talked to them about that. I think that is definitely on our list of things that we're sorting with them. But specifically, that matrix is about like the green infrastructure, the above ground, the below ground, the BMPs that are out there.
Okay. Well, I'd love if we could potentially expand the scope of that to include the impacts to our green infrastructure. Those shorelines that they are blasting away with increased water flow into the creeks is creating a ton of floating nutrient loading, and it's making the water less clear. It's causing damage to the biodiversity of the plant communities that are growing there, and we can't be so specific around hardscapes and built infrastructure if we're completely ignoring the broader impact that it's having to the environment in which it's flowing out into. So as much as I think in the past we've always said, well, our concern is about the pipe and that hard built landscape, we're having really serious impacts as a city on the natural environment by ignoring that. So I would love if we could start making that one of the metrics that we're considering as they're doing projects. They can't just say, oh, all we're doing is putting in a bigger pipe because we have to stop this neighborhood from flooding and that's our only goal. We also have to have a goal of not further exacerbating the erosion issues that we're experiencing in those water bodies. Because it is a measurable outcome of what we're doing.
And I think there's a couple places that we could work to address that, not only within like even our prioritization parameters, like if we bring it into parameters, but in this category that we're calling now restoration and resilience in the capital program. I mean, there's a lot of need out there right now in our system where we have a lot of eroded shorelines, stream banks, and building it into our capital program. And then part of that would also be, as projects are brought in for review or we're working together on things, making those impacts be considered and be addressed.
Great. Yeah, I would love if they're going to help us ensure we have the funding to mitigate the damage that their infrastructure upgrades are causing, then we also need to have that coordination piece where if they're planning something that's going to be potentially having an impact like that, we need to then also in our CIP accommodate whatever it's going to cost us to harden that opposite shoreline or whatever it is that we need to do to mitigate the damage that the infrastructure changes on their part are causing.
Right. Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Menz.
Thank you, President Benny and Vice President Musich. Piggybacking on that, my question was around our suggestion, because you asked for suggestions on the prioritization. Like, is there a way to get nature on there? Like, can we define that we want to prioritize, or at times prioritize nature? And sometimes in our long-range plans now, we're looking at those trees and figuring out how much that actually costs to remove them. So if we're looking at these CIPs, how do we define that? And then maybe that would help us, argue with the city, like the city projects, maybe there's less concern, their infrastructure, while as we're trying to make sure that nature is prioritized as well. The other question I had or suggestion was, and it seems to fit in one of the categories, is around fields, and I envision that there will be future discussions around natural turf versus artificial turf, and thinking about how our program of stormwater management might be able to, impact or be a part of those discussions. And that seems to be a place where those could find, because that's a really big impact on what gets run off, and seems to be maybe an opportunity for us to utilize these dollars for infrastructure to improve the stormwater.
Thank you for that feedback. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to,
Just one more
Commissioner
quick
Schaefer,
question. Maybe you could speak a little bit to how, with the water body impairments, we're going to address this in more of a holistic way across, with other environmental staff, whether that's, goose management and all the poop running into the lake, whether that's the carp and the impact of the huge carp population on the water quality. I'd like us to just think about how we're not going to keep this stormwater management in a silo, but really look at like all of the impacts, and whether that's, an ecologist hired for a partial project or something. But I think broadly looking across categories. But I really appreciate this work, and it's exciting.
Thank you, thank you. So do you want me to talk a little bit more about the water body impairments and how they're being considered, or?
That would be great, yeah.
So, several of our Minneapolis lakes have water body impairments, and there's this whole program that it's called Total Maximum Daily Load, TMDLs, that establishes levels of nutrients for lakes. And we have impairments specifically at Lake Nokomis for phosphorus. There are impairments in Minnehaha Creek for bacteria and biota, I believe. Trying to think off the top of my head. Powderhorn has some impairments. Lake of the Isles of May, there's a list of the 9 impairments that we have, but I can't recall them all off the top of my head. But so we are required to do work towards reducing those impairments as part of our federal NPDES permit. So that's why this is listed here. We will need to make progress. We will need to show progress towards our water body impairments as part of our stormwater work. But I definitely hear what you're saying about looking at stormwater and a lot of different impacts, and what we're doing in a lot of our practices to try to manage it, not just in a pipe and not just in a BMP. Thanks. Sure.
Okay, I have a couple of questions or comments. Something that Vice President Musich what she was speaking about, it's, I think what triggers it in my mind a little bit is this discussion of easements. And so if easements are granted for city infrastructure that's then terminating on park board land in a water body, one thing that would concern me is if the easement is, easements typically grant the easement holder a lot of discretion for use of that space to some extent for maintenance and so on. But I'd be very concerned that, I would be very concerned if we're doing easements without having obligations for maintaining the infrastructure or potentially any adverse impacts from that. And I think an easement is a powerful tool and something that they'll want, and it's a nice negotiating point to make sure the park board's getting what it wants. Because, I think we took a walk one day and we saw something that I'm sure is in either intended to be in an easement or in an easement that would be from the city street system that was dreadful. So that's one thing. In terms of, if you go back to the slide with your priorities with CSO and everything, I think the CSO, the rain leader disconnects are a great place to start, especially with your current staffing levels. That's where I started when I got my job at the university. We started with that. And it was very easy, and it helps you understand the infrastructure better. And it's the other slide with the categories then too. So, yes, so this one. And then I think I like what you have here, and other than really just drawing out more standalone water quality improvement projects from maybe an infrastructure perspective, and I can make that comment, maybe at a later date, I think that this is a very good list. The lake water quality one being second, I think there's some real benefit to that, because I think citizens will see that. Some of the stuff later down the line, they're not gonna really see. But that one they will. We'll be able to point to things that they can actually witness with maybe lake treatments, aeration, and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be very good for citizen buy-in to this work. The other thing is, it's interesting to me that you have to have the categories. I think that makes sense, but it's very clear, though, this will all still be funded from the utility rate, essentially, right? It's just built into the utility rate.
Well, I believe that the city of Minneapolis does some bonding also for besides just using the utility proceeds, and then they also use some grant programs for some of the work that's being done within their program. So I don't know that it's all just directly from the utility. I mean, the utility would eventually pay off the bond, but.
Yeah, there is
as-
enterprise bonding and so on, and then there'd be maybe some debt service as well. I guess I would just be careful that the city wouldn't have too much control about a park board's stormwater CIP. So if there could be agreements about the size of the categories essentially, but the details of what's actually going to be in each category, I think should stay with the park board itself. And then the only other thing, maybe it's related and maybe we just covered it, but your Venn diagram with equity in the middle, adding value to other projects, I think it's similar to also maybe coordination with other projects, opportunities to coordinate, is
Right.
that what you're thinking?
That's what that
And I know that the city takes some of their enterprise bonding dollars from stormwater, for example, and they put it toward stormwater elements of other improvement work that they're doing when they develop a project. Like I know that Roof Depot was out there for a while, but you can still see all of what they were planning to do with the Roof Depot site. And they were taking stormwater enterprise dollars, water enterprise dollars, but they were taking the stormwater to build the stormwater systems. And something Commissioner Menz just mentioned about, for example, if we do develop a field with turf, we're gonna have to treat and capture that runoff, manage that runoff in some way. Maybe that's a way to fund something like that, which might have more cost associated with it if it has to be an underground system. Okay. Commissioner Schaefer.
I just had one more quick comment. With your approach with the city, you're having staff requests, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're having a staff request at your presentation, making a pitch for that, the CIP request. Is there a maintenance category, or how are you addressing maintenance? In some ways, if we're building this out from the beginning, this could be a category we just set aside right from the get-go.
So right now, the maintenance, it could exist in both programs, I think. I think it could be in our, kind of our operational budget, as we call it, and it could be a category in the CIP budget. I believe that the city is, well, it depends on what you define as maintenance. There's kind of this fine line between rehab and reconstruction, and they have some formulas that they use about if more than 50% of the catch basin replacements are going to have to occur on a project, then it goes into reconstruction versus rehab. So we're still kind of defining that for ourselves, and we'll have to figure out where those land. But depending on the level of maintenance, some of that could be in the operational budget. Some of it, if it starts to get up into that rehab and reconstruction category, then it would go into a CIP.
Great, thank you for answering that. I would just encourage you that we've heard this loud and clear from the beginning, that maintenance is just important as the CIP built out, and equally. So if we can just keep that in mind as we move forward, that we're not weighting one over the other. And maybe we have nothing to maintain at the beginning, and it needs to shift. You know, the proportions or ratios need to shift. But I think we have to have a definitive plan on how we can appropriately maintain what we build out and what we improve.
And that is what some of that stormwater maintenance and ownership matrix will get to, is who is responsible for that. And that definitely is the maintenance. And we do have a lot of needs out here. This is the west side of Batay-McCoska. This pipe has been in this condition for more than a decade on this side here. So there are a lot of needs, and yes, taking care of them will be an important piece of the program too.
And make sure that we document that for the public as we roll this out, that you show where the maintenance dollars are coming from and the proportions shown.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that presentation and all the other presentations so far. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and recess us for our break, and we'll come back here at 6:45.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your support and listening.
Okay, we can go ahead and reconvene. And we're now on the section of the revenue discussion. Director Wiseman.
I'm here to continue our conversation on revenue. So after the previous budget retreat, a MPRB staff revenue team was put together to workshop the commissioner revenue ideas and additional staff ideas. 3 meetings were held, a kickoff meeting, and then a 3-hour workshop 1, and I think 2.5-hour workshop 2. So as a reminder for our revenue discussion, the pyramid on the right is really important. We have public benefit that we provide daily to our constituents, and there is no cost recovery. It is completely supported by property taxes. Then you have the community and individual, where we have a level of cost recovery built in. For youth programs, we now have a discount fee option, so some individuals pay 100% and others are able to participate for free. And then we have our profit centers. So that's an example of that is our enterprise fund and our golf operations, those areas that are highly individualized and act as a business and should be profitable. So our revenue team was charged with identifying $1 million in new revenue annually for the next 3 years. And that is net revenue after expenses. And at the end of the 3 years, it would be $3 million total. The parameters that this team was given was to be mindful of the enterprise and general fund commitments and needs. But the revenue need is really in the general fund, and it needs to benefit the general fund. And the ideas and items need to be doable in the time frame allotted. I won't name off all of the participants, but the members are listed here. The National Recreation and Park Association has a revenue development management school. It's a 2-year, 1-week intensive training program. So 4 of us on the team have been through the revenue development school, and that is myself, Christina Anderson, Shane Stenzel, and Keith Bites. And then the rest of the cross-functional group is also listed here. So as we looked at the commissioner ideas and the staff ideas, we focused largely on the general fund, or how we could move or create revenue within the enterprise fund without impacting the fund's sustainability. So I'll kind of mention that with a couple of the ideas that came through. So the first category is really around sponsorships, naming, and advertising. There was a lot of activation with the revenue team around this area. This group feels that we are leaving the most money on the table in this area. And what we heard from the team members who worked for other organizations like the University of Minnesota, State of Minnesota, and also from the revenue school participants, their interaction with other organizations throughout the country, is that you really need to have a professional position or a contracted professional who is the dedicated support for sponsorships. We are really, really good at getting the small stuff. Our rec center staff go to the neighboring communities all the time and ask for donations and gifts of product and sponsorships for small sponsorships for their community events. Our movies and music in the parks, we're really good at getting those community level sponsorships of $5,000. We can get those left and right. Where we're lacking is in having the connections that you need in this community and this environment to attract and obtain those large-scale sponsorships, like movies and music in the parks brought to you by X. And so having a position would really pay for itself. It would have parameters and requirements. If you don't bring in, double or triple your salary, you're not gonna have a job. Different parameters like that could be. And then what's really important is that if we created a sponsorship team, so those individuals within our area or in our organization that would want to sell sponsorships and have those ideas, they would have that dedicated support person that would help them through that and would help them in branding. Our group felt like the park board could do a better job branding itself. Identifying assets and programs that would have sponsorship or naming value, naming rights, creating investing in partners, and even could assist in helping with advertising because, for example, we began advertising on our hockey boards. We had to contract out to get the expertise someone who is familiar with selling advertising to help us get the advertising dollars that we were able to bring in at the ice arena. So it's kind of invest some money to potentially have some really large rewards. So I know some people will have some reactions to this slide. But in order to reach the level of revenue needed, some big ideas should be considered. Many metro cities are utilizing billboards. The city of Minneapolis, Maple Grove, Anoka Blaine, Bloomington, and billboard leases can earn up to $15,000 per month, depending on placement. And you can also negotiate free advertisements in your billboards, where the billboard would actually advertise park board events and programs and services as well. Cell phone towers can earn between $3,000 and $5,000 per month, and the staff that have been, not so much the cell phone towers, but the staff that have been thinking about the billboards for quite a while even have some potential locations that they think would work. So it will be interested in hearing from this board if that is anything that this board would even consider, because I think we have some staff energy around wanting to investigate that possibility. So for vendor contracts, one of our thoughts were, one of our parameters at our meeting that we set for ourselves was a lot of small dollars can add up to a lot of money over time. And so really looking at what things that have actually come to us. So a mini golf provider has contacted and has interest in like the commons. Wheel Fund has contacted us and is interested in expanding into other areas. There was an idea of food halls, so when you were thinking about different vendor agreements, you know, or repurposing different buildings, Nicollet Island might be a possibility, would maybe be a nice food hall type area. And then concessions at premier locations and tournaments. And this would require a little bit of investment, kind of with the plaza idea as well, is if you build, you know, a location that then food trucks and other vending or concessions things can happen. But definitely there is interest with our premier ball fields and our tournaments in getting some concession revenue. So for parking, parking is an enterprise operation. So there's kind of two examples here. The surge parking would be at locations that are currently already in the enterprise fund. So the idea around the surge parking would be the difference between the normal pay rate and the surge pay rate could be the allocation that goes to the general fund, so that the enterprise fund still gets the credit for operating that location, but the surge pricing would be the fundraiser for the general fund. They are going to use technology to understand the surge areas and the zones. And this year, they are going to pilot surge pricing for the Pride Festival. So paid parking at Neiman and Boston. So we already have paid parking at Parade. However, that paid parking for the ball fields is enterprise fund.
Can I interject? We have paid parking at half of Parade.
Right. And so if we looked at our other premier ball fields, Neiman and Boston, the parking lot that's closest or adjacent to the ball fields is in really poor condition. So we need to understand when that rehab will take place at that ball field, because we feel we can't put paid parking in there right now with the condition of the parking lot itself. Now Neiman, there is a parking lot at Neiman, and that one we could trigger almost immediately. It's in fair condition, good condition. There's use of that parking lot during the daytime hours now with the return to work of state employees, as well as the housing that's now occupied in that area. We don't have the streets, so we couldn't do meters, but we definitely could introduce paid parking in the parking lot. And the Dan, our parking person, Dan estimated that Boston, once we were able to do paid parking, could generate 30 to 40K a year, and Neiman 25 to 30K. And those are general fund, so those would directly go to the general fund as opposed to the enterprise fund. On the electric car charging, there isn't as significant of a return of investment on electric car charging. However, the electric car charging that we currently have in our system isn't very strategically placed. And so if you're thinking about parking, it costs about $2,000 for the actual equipment, costs more to install it. But if you installed it while a parking lot was being rehabbed or resurfaced, it could maybe be combined into like a rehab project. And just adding a couple of spots in very logistically placed places could bring in some additional revenue. For events, some of the conversation was really around capacity with our events, both with the event staff, but especially with the safety aspect of our events. So you'll see there isn't a lot of ideas around events. You know, trying to identify and produce high revenue events. The message from the team is that can't be looked at as one department's job to do that. If we're going to do that, or like an annual Parks Gala, those type of things, it would need to be an agency-wide assist, right? So that MPRB hosted premier tournaments. I think Recreation has some really good ideas around bringing in additional revenue. We see AAU tournaments, we say USA tournaments. Is that all the right terms? I'm aging myself for when my kids were doing it. But all these tournaments come into our building and they generate a lot of revenue. And we could host MPRB sponsored premier tournaments, make it a weekend or a family event, and generate a lot of revenue for the general fund. And also small pop-up revenue generating events in neighborhood parks. We've started to see those in the downtown parks, and they are doing well. And we could expand that with recreation staff, not the downtown park staff, but recreation staff hosting these small pop-up revenue generating events. There are a lot of fees ideas, both building usage and program fees. Really analyzing building usage and determining new uses for underutilized buildings. So the hub model, I think Commissioner Menz, you mentioned that's on here. Staff had an idea for a fitness center that charged fees. They talked about birthday packages, the amount of money that is spent at other locations to have a complete birthday package. And then offering off hours when the building is closed for more building rentals through corporate meetings or a alternative work site, those type of things. And then for program fees itself, you've had presentations and you've talked a lot about youth program fees and how the structure has completely changed. We're calculating what the full cost of a program is, and then we're offering the discounts. And right now, we like what we're seeing. If it continues to go as well as we think it's going to go, we feel the next natural step would be to look at the senior program fee model and maybe do something similar, because we believe that the same type of thing is happening, right? We have parks that are offering senior programs for $10, $15, $20, and and thinking that a senior doesn't have the ability to pay more if they knew what the actual cost of the program was and could choose their discount. So you might be seeing that come forward during this budget process. Also, really utilizing the data, expanding programs that have high wait lists. And our highest wait lists right now are Rec Plus and preschool programming. So where could we potentially expand Rec Plus and preschool programming? I know Commissioner Menz brought up taking over after-school childcare from the school board, which isn't what the direction our staff went with this. What they identified is, and I can't remember which school it was, but there's a school that eliminated their school after-school childcare program. And what if we offered or approached the school to ask if we could utilize some of their classrooms, and then we could expand our Rec Plus and potentially in the summertime expand preschool programming utilizing those that building location. And then sports skill development programming. So we used to have a contract with a vendor that provided that for the park board, and that was eliminated during one of the budget processes. And we haven't picked up the slack on that. And we feel that there is revenue to be generated out of skill development programming of all ages, not just preschool. Field rentals, they would really like to look at the structure of our field rentals and increase the fees for some of the outside organizations that rent our fields. The golf simulators have been successful. Don't know if we would have any other locations to have them, but that was an idea. And adding canoe racks. Then we had, we called it our parking lot. I took it off of here because it's not parking. These are our kind of the long range ideas. So the previous slides were things that we think we could work through and work on right away and within the 2026 budget development. And these are kind of those wish list type of items. You know, our first meeting, we were at Waterworks and we had it in the afternoon, and when we got off, it was rush hour. And more than one person was saying, boy, we wish we could do a parkway toll and get some revenue from these commuters that drive through our system. A parking ramp, parking enforcement, and that is not talking about park police. That's talking about investing in the technology to read the license plates so that it makes it easier to enforce the parking. And it will increase fees and fines, which is general fund, and then eventually get people to pay for parking as they should and increase the enterprise fund. Bicycle license came up. Again, a lot of this was around our regional system, right? Because we are only receiving 10% assistance from the state when we, by statute, should be receiving 40%. And so how could we generate more revenue out of our regional system so that it's not fully landing on the property taxpayer? And then land and lease. Here, the Northeast Ice Arena shows up as a restructured use or a sale or, you know, something. The airport fee, Fort Snelling Golf Course, the closing of that or a reuse of that area, restructuring our lease agreements. Solar is on this one. And then some of the fun program events, high rope courses, a zip line on the river, pop-up beer gardens, beer koozies, that is your permit to have alcohol at tournaments. So rather than them hiding their coolers and having a koozie. And then finally, the MPRB Plus membership. That was one of the staff ideas, that we could sell a MPRB Plus membership and maybe you could get priority registration or different things like that. So with that, I will stop and hear some of your feedback on some of these ideas and then any additional ideas that you may have.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. I'll call on Commissioner Rucker.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation. And I'm glad that you're looking into sponsors because we are leaving a lot of money on the table. You know, just with the cell towers, that's a lot of money coming in. You know, I have a friend that has a rotating billboard, and just for his business, he's generating like 20 to 30,000 a month just to have that up because of the advertisements that are being scrolled through daily. So I just want to thank you on that. We can just continue to look into that. That would be great. Sponsorships on jerseys, things like that will work as well. But thank you.
Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, so, you know, the billboards thing, I'll have to sit with. For some reason, I feel better about having advertisements on like the jerseys and on in arenas and stuff like that. But billboards kind of, I don't know. It's just we're advertised to everywhere but our dreams nowadays. And I don't know, but that money, that is enticing. I don't know. And maybe we use it for a while and then we can change it and we can advertise our own things if we're in better financial times. But initially, I would want to have that be a sort of a last resort thing. I'm not a huge fan of that. Or at the very least, maybe we do some constituent stuff like that, because I think that could be something that could be very divisive. For parking, I guess I would just say, why just Neiman and Boson? Why not other spots? Why not, along our parkways, around our lakes? Those places are, if we're looking at that, let's look full. And let's see here, one other thing. I really like the idea of the small pop-up events. I think that's great. I think that, the security concerns of like the larger events, I don't necessarily share those security concerns, but I recognize that in order to do them and insurance and reasons like that, we have to have a ton of stuff, and that kind of makes it really difficult. But those smaller events, we can maybe get around that. And if we start to make those consistent and stuff, that could really, I think, be a good idea. And I would also, really encourage, maybe like smaller, place for food trucks, or just like a food stand, like in places like, let's say like the south end of like Thomas Beach or whatever. Like, sure, we have the pavilion, sure, we have Harriet, but are people really going to be leaving the beach and going places? And maybe you combine that with a food hall idea. Maybe that is something that switches and it can kind of generate kind of hype and stuff like that, and have smaller businesses come in. I really like that idea of really looking and making sure we're hitting every single square foot of our park with ability for folks to purchase concessions and things like that. So those are my initial thoughts.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. I have thoughts on all these things. I'm sure that we all do. But one of the things I wanted to highlight that I thought that was a really good idea actually is the idea of putting in fitness centers around. I'll just say, most people know my child is now in high school, but when he was a certain age and I wanted to get a workout in, I honestly would sign him up if it came down to a park thing or like a YMCA thing. I'd sign him up for the YMCA thing because that meant that I had an hour or 2 hours where I could go work out and my child was occupied. And I don't think I'm alone in being a parent in that way that would utilize that. As we have children's programming, we have senior programming. I do think it could potentially be something. I don't know, just throwing that out there. And that's the sponsors on the billboards for fields and stuff, I think is the best bet. That's just personally I mean, we've talked about that a lot, and I do think it's everywhere in the rest of the world. It's kind of harkens back to like a old-timey feel, as my son would probably use that phrase, if you had local businesses being advertised locally. You know, I think I would agree with Commissioner Olson in terms of the gigantic billboard. I would assume that it would be just very different and it would feel very high-tech, but like just local community stuff on our fields, I think would be a good idea. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Commissioner Menz.
Thank you. I think that, yeah, a lot of same stuff. I'm not a big fan of the billboard idea. I think that might be a little bit much, even though it is a good revenue generator. I'm wondering about the field rental costs, and those things can really add up. And I do think that we need to get to a place where we're revenue neutral, but we really have to have some clear understanding of what that means and what those costs are entailing. I know that we increased fields $5 one year and $5 the next year. Well, in reality, we doubled it. And I know that from what I'm hearing, we have to have this come to the general fund, but is there anything from preventing us from, increasing our parking revenue in the enterprise fund and designating a certain amount to go to the general fund if that revenue increases? So if we increase our parking rates, generally double them, would we be able to put money yearly from the enterprise fund in based on that action? Is that something that's explorable? I don't know if that's a billboard idea up here, but that's just something I think we should look at.
Vice President Musich.
Thank you, President Abeni. So there's lots of good ideas in here, and I think the ones that I'm most open to, and probably many of the residents in Minneapolis would be most open to, are things that are going to enhance or expand the user experience. So when we talk about increasing small events in smaller parks as a revenue generator, like I know we've done in the past, like a pop-up beer truck with food trucks in a park, right, as part of a food truck rodeo or something. Things like that are going to activate a space, but also give people an experience they otherwise wouldn't have there. Those things speak to me as not being super controversial, but also bringing in revenues that we need. When we talk about adding pay parking in places that we haven't been charging it, but that we are seeing increased use and an opportunity for generating revenue while also being able to maintain those spaces, like that kind of stuff seems like it would be doable without really upsetting folks. The sponsorship thing, where we're seeing it everywhere else, and I would assume people are thinking, why aren't we doing it here when you're asking me to pay more to participate in a program, when our suburban counterparts are finding ways to offset those fee increases by generating revenue through targeted advertising in a sports facility location. I mean, I could go on, but the things that are both normal and enhancing of the experience, I think are the ones that speak to me the most. Thanks.
Commissioner Elper.
Yeah, thanks for this great presentation of ideas. Really loved the out-of-the-box thinking by the whole team, so that was really, really interesting to hear, and kind of the rationale behind some of the ideas. So thanks for sharing that. Couple thoughts on things here. Love the idea of more events. One space that comes to mind, and I realize this would be a hard decision, but the new Graco building, maybe it's hitting the pause button on our, I believe it's our system equity investment, our staffing, and instead, switching that to like a, hey, green building, green wedding, something, just thinking it's a lovely space, I would imagine, right on the river, that people would love to have events there. So just, it's it looks tough, and I realize we're going next into pre-planning for recession impacts, so I just think now's the time before we've already started activating that space to maybe consider doing something else there, even though it's hard, you know, but keeping the commitment that we've already made at the existing places that we're at feels more important. Billboards also, I think I feel concerned about the big billboards because where would they go that would probably have the most eyes on them? And I think they would be in places, ones that come to mind are that are by our freeway system, like 28th Street Tot Lot or MLK Park or Franklin Steel Park, and all these places, they're all our most, well, not, maybe not MLK Park, but some of these other ones are, they're not, they're not our, demographically speaking, they're more of our underserved parks that have a lot of communities of, low, high poverty rates, very diverse communities, and so we wouldn't consider a billboard at Bede-Makaska, right? Or we wouldn't consider that at Minnehaha Falls. So why would we consider it there? I guess that's my sense on it. But I'm open to the idea of sponsorship at, just kind of mom and pop stuff on fields or with games or at our rec centers. That feels more like it fits with our values. Love the idea of activating, like Vice President Musich said, of like things that enhance the experience, like food trucks on the parkways. We had an event on May 17th, and there were huge crowds coming out to watch people run. And wouldn't it be great if there was a food truck there where they could buy things and we could permit them? And that'd be lovely. Also, I do have one question before I go on and on with my list. But were other parking fee increases considered by the staff group? And what were they, if yes, and why were they discarded? And if not considered, why not?
President Benny and Commissioner Alper, I think what we were putting on here were those new ideas. We have a parking staff person, Dan, who is looking at all the opportunities throughout our system, and we are consistently adding to our meter system in the enterprise fund. So I think we were more kind of hyper-focused almost on what would be those things that we could, shift to the general fund.
Got it. Well, just because you mentioned the surge pricing model, and I think that's a great way to look at it, where maybe part of it is that base that goes to the enterprise fund and things on top of it. Maybe we do it for the next year or 2 years or 3 years, that goes to the general fund. And, one place that comes to mind that I'm sure President Abeni would know about is Bohemian Flats. And how we have it's like, hey, park here all day if you work at the U, and we're kind of undercutting what the U charges for parking. And so, like, why are we? That would be my question to staff. Why aren't we charging? That seems like an opportunity there. And then also, just when we're thinking about raising prices, I hear, Commissioner Renz mentioned fields, and, we have raised some of these things in prior years, and I just think we should be sensitive to where we're raising things this upcoming year. And the things that are close to our goals and our values, I think are things that we should, maybe, like that triangle chart you had, like consider that in terms of, maybe those don't get as much of an increase, or maybe those are held, especially if they were done last year. And but there's certain ones like auxiliary services that aren't part of the core piece. I feel maybe it's time just to tie some of those to inflation, and then it doesn't come up every year. It's just like, that's what we do because we have inflation of, don't even know the value, 3, 4, 5%.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Yes, I just had a question about, did we not have an ordinance around not advertising in our parks?
Point of information, we have an ordinance around bill posting, and it says that no bill posting is allowed without the express consent, I believe, of the superintendent. So I don't believe we prohibit advertising, but rather we restrict it to only certain cases where we've authorized it.
Thank you. I don't know what the definition of bill posting is compared to what we're talking about. Billboard, bill posting, I'm not sure.
It'd be like, may I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
Bill posting would be people posting signage in parks. So like when a real estate agent puts up a sign in a park, that's bill posting. When someone posts a lawn sign saying, hey, I'm having a garage sale in my yard, that's bill posting. When we have a apartment complex or a coffee shop or something nearby a park posting things or putting up placards or sandwich boards on parkways, that's bill posting.
Thank you. Question. I love the idea. Thank you for all these ideas. I think we might have to address that somehow or other so that we don't have confusion around our ordinance. Yeah.
I would just, President Abeni and Commissioner Schaefer, I would just say that in this whole process, we would review any ordinances and bring forward any ordinance amendments that we needed to do in order to implement any of these ideas.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I'm not crazy about the billboard idea either, personally. I love these ideas about mini golf, wheel fund rental, higher parking fees. I mean, those are all, I think, very reasonable, but do they get you to that $1 million a year is probably the big question. One other idea, it doesn't really have to pertain to this directly, but I do think there is an opportunity we can think about in the future of allowing people, whether it's through public assistance funds like SNAP, to be able to use our canoes and kayaks through wheel fund rental. If there's some way we can network with agencies that would have a way for people to be able to spend in our rental equipment. And now we've got free programming, but we do not allow access for people who maybe can't afford to rent a kayak or a canoe and do the chain of lakes. So if there was some governmental program or something that would allow someone to come with a voucher and use our park system for those rental kayaks or whatever, I'm trying to think what other categories, maybe the mini golf, some of those other activities would be really a potential for revenue generation, but obviously more of a longer term plan and strategy to roll that out. But thank you for your work. These are exciting ideas.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Commissioner Menz, but we are way off schedule now, but, so. You could, okay. I'll just say thanks for all the work. I know it was a lot of staff time and commitment to develop those ideas, and there's some really good things there. I'll just comment, I mean, I have a few comments. I think the billboard I don't find that might work either. But I think the fitness center idea is something that's worth at least trying to figure out if there's a location where that would be suitable and what could be piloted. And especially if you could figure out a way to do silver sneakers, because I'm assuming there's a membership for this. And when I've played pickleball with some retired people, they complained that they couldn't use silver sneakers to pay for the pickleball. So that might be something also to explore. But thank you so much. Okay. With that, we're going to move on.
Point of information, President Abeni, Phillips Community Center actually has a fitness center already.
Oh,
by the
really?
way.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to, Northeast Ice Arena has a brand new fitness center.
Okay.
That was developed, and we have so we can promote those things.
Are there monthly fees to participate there?
Yes.
Oh, staff. All right. Okay. Okay, well, we don't have anything like that in Southwest, that's all I'm gonna say.
All right. Good evening, commissioners. Of course, I enter with Post-it paper and markers, so you're probably getting pretty used to that with me. So here we go. This is pre-planning for recession impacts. We obviously don't know exactly how this year is going to unfold, but we certainly see indicators that we might be in a position at some point this year to think really hard about a significant cut to our 2026 budget. Even if that doesn't happen, I have heard some rumblings that maybe you don't like the cuts that we've already made, some of the service level cuts we've already made that are predicted into 2026. So even at a minimum, I think there's some rumblings amongst you that you'd want us to maybe reconsider a few of those and maybe offer some other ideas. So to that end, in the same way that we have the revenue team who's worked really hard to bring to you some ideas, we will also be engaging within the next couple of weeks a service level team. And that team is going to focus primarily on kind of a combined look between program and operations at service level cuts. Once we get a sense of what they might recommend, then a lot of my team, the support services team, would look at what are the support services cuts that would match that type of a service level cut. So do you need less of something in order to support that? Again, these are really preliminary. We've done this type of exercise almost annually, but we typically do it within kind of departments. This is going to be something where folks work across divisions in order to think about how those things come together. That being said, would like to equip them with some thinking from you as they begin that work. We'll want to lead you through a few things to kind of prime this conversation. One of those is at the first retreat, Julie did a really nice job of walking through some of what happened within the organization between 2008 and 2012. That was a period of the Great Recession. If I remember correctly, it was 117 staff that we lost during that time through various layoffs, attrition, that type of scenario, and significant budget cuts that we made during that time. It also resulted in a boom of us thinking about new revenue sources, so there was some of that came out of it. This first slide, when I look back at 2008 to 2012, there were some themes, and many of these are not earth-shattering, right? But this was to give you a sense of what previous boards have thought in terms of how to manage some type of a downsizing of the system. One of them, of course, is to increase and diversify revenue. We've already started that work. Another one is kind of a really firm mandate around no expansion of services without an increase in revenue. This next one is kind of a value conversation of whether or not reductions would be based on commissioner priorities or kind of across the organization cuts. In most cases, in the previous, it was really around commissioner priorities and not around organization-wide cuts in certain categories. There tended to be a focus on reductions in programs or services that were considered underutilized or substandard, so not cutting the things that are working really well, but taking that opportunity to remove those things that might not be as stable. We had a lot of conversations with previous boards when we got into funding about kind of protecting the youth experience and providing that, but then putting the adult experience more in a fee-based system. So that's has been one of kind of the tenets of previous board thinking along this. When it came to thinking about staff reductions, most boards were interested in that being through attrition, buyouts, versus things like layoffs. And then there was a strong thread in the previous work around staff engagement. So making sure that we took opportunities like we just did with the revenue to engage staff, especially staff who might have some really specialized expertise in areas, so that there was kind of twofold. One, you might get an idea that you never considered and really kind of push the limits, but also as a way of kind of growing some organizational understanding and some organizational muscle around how budgets work and how the organization works around that. In the spirit of making sure to kind of bring forward things you've already done in the past so that you aren't just revisiting something from a clean slate, wanted to share with you some of the highlights of the work you did last year about this time for a budget retreat, where you would have had dots and charts up on the wall and all of that stuff. And if you want to see the actual dot alignment, you can find that in our budget page on the internet. But there were a couple of things that I wanted to draw out. One of them is that there were really 3 categories last year that you prioritized for property taxes. One of them was a kind of a large category of staffing, and there was a whole host of things, whether it was compensation, healthcare, workers' comp, or paying for additional leaves. Another category that you had prioritized for funding, especially property tax funding, was system equity investment, primarily the introduction of Graco and Upper Harbor Terminal. That has a tangential impact of also being something that supports staff, because by investing in those properties with additional staffing, you're not pulling other staffing from the organization or stretching those staff thin. And then, of course, introducing that new citywide program, Sliding Fee. When it came to thinking about one-time funding or things you might want to pause, there were a few categories that I would note here. One of them was the additional project management staff. There were a couple there's one related to the volunteerism performance goal, trying to continue to move forward with that goal, but not looking at additional staffing per se, and we've started down that road. There were a few things around technology improvements, call center and phone system upgrades, that was not supported by the board. And then there was additional resources for communication and a website. Those pieces weren't prioritized for property tax funding, so they were either paused or considered for one time. So just to kind of go back to where you were last year. So with that, wanted to, again, as we launch this next staff team, who will be looking at bringing forward some recommendations for service level cuts, wanted to get some initial thinking from all of you. If maybe you've changed from where you're at last year, maybe there are some additional things you want us to consider. You should actually have at your desk all 3 of these slides. So the one I've got up and these 2 slides, so I don't need to toggle between them. I think from an efficiency standpoint, I would like to hit the questions one by one so that I don't have to manage more than one sticky paper at a time. I can do that if we need to, but I would love to begin with, when you look at those 2008 to 2012 approaches, is that resonating with you? Is there anything that doesn't resonate there, or something else that you would lift up in terms of kind of some of the values we might have around reductions?
Okay, so I'm hearing that you want to do question number 1 first, and I see Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, so, I think on this, I'm pretty good with most all of them, except for how, when you said that typically it was commissioner priority cuts versus across the organization. I've kind of personally been thinking about this, kind of struggling with, how am I to make an objective case or for, certain cuts, because I think often as commissioners, as much as like we like to think we're logical and rational, we are quite easily moved and quite emotional, and, constituents coming up and really reaching out to us about ice rinks, for instance, that can have a real effect on what we decide. And that's not necessarily an objective look. That's not necessarily an objective, we're spending, this amount of dollars, per thing or per, constituent that gets a service. Whereas, I think perhaps staff can be maybe a little bit more insulated and can be a little bit more, this program, we know it's important, and we know that for every dollar we put in, we're serving this many constituents, whereas this one is 4 times less. And I think that's something that, I would appreciate, and I think that's something that could help us as an organization moving forward, rather than just kind of saying, oh, we cut this and now we're hearing a lot from this group and we cut this and we're not hearing a lot from this group. I don't necessarily think that's a great way to move forward with it. So that's what I would say. Otherwise, I like all these. I really like, particularly youth programming and protecting that. I think if we cut that, if we start to disinvest in that, I think we see downstream issues as a city that all of us want to avoid. And so I kind of hold that pretty highly.
Thank you.
Anybody else on question 1? Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just lend my voice to say I agree with all the things that were done in the past. They all seem pretty realistic. And I would agree a little bit about like we don't need it to be commissioner priorities, but at the same time, we were elected to try to do that. So I'm fine with keeping all of them in that idea. Thank you.
Yep, I guess it seems like there are no other interest in question 1, but yeah, these are good. If, as much as possible, if there are staff reductions, it should be through attrition as much as possible. I think, I think some of this we're already sort of doing or have been doing, but I wonder really how easily the organization, you said that you're going to convene another group, but reductions in underutilized and or substandard services. I think that's nothing that this board's ever really talked about, because everything that the park board does is great and good. But I think that maybe needs a serious look. Because this board hasn't looked at, we have not done that really in this time, so it means that there's probably something. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead to go to question number 2, which is what do you want to protect of existing programs, services, and infrastructure? Anybody? Oh, Vice President Musich.
Thank you, President Abeni. I really want to see us in terms of protecting things that we've done. I want to make sure that we're continuing to make progress on the establishment of system-level investments and things that are going to save us long-term on maintenance, like the work that we've been doing around, resurfacing our sports courts to ensure that they have a longer life because we've done the maintenance it needs so that we don't have to replace it as frequently. Where we're doing the pavement repairs on our trails so that those can hold up longer and not need to be redone. Those types of investments that, while they might be dollar, whatever the saying is, penny, it's too late for me now. You know what I'm getting at. Like, we're going to save a couple bucks today, but it's going to cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars in the future. I don't want us to lose the progress we're making in that realm. I also really want to make sure that we continue to have the fee structure that we put in place for youth programming. I think it's very successful. It's hugely popular with people. And we talk about, and this is going back to your first question, I'm sorry, but we talk about supporting adult programming through fees. Looking at expanding that youth fee structure to the whole city, I feel like it is something we should be exploring because it doesn't force us to cut things, but allows us to support it without having to increase our tax revenues. And I have a couple other things, but I'm sure other people will talk about them, so I'll stop now. Thanks.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Yes, I would agree with Commissioner Musich's points around maintenance and continuing our asset life cycle analysis. Even though we don't have the funding for some of those, I think it's really important that we as a park board get a handle on the repair and maintenance of our paved paths and get a reconstruction plan ready for how we're going to replace them all when the time comes, because we don't have a reconstruction bucket at this point. And I think that's one of the biggest assets that we have in our system, and it's pretty basic that we should figure out a plan to cover all of that. I would love to keep our environmental staff gains. That was something that was new to this board. I think was an important addition that we'd love to keep. And of course, the Matthews and Lake of the Isle ice skating rink. Some of these closures, in the regional system will have a real impact on our visitor counts. And that will be something that will be something that I think the community would really appreciate us saving.
Commissioner Menz.
Yes, thank you, President Benny. I wanted to make sure that when I mention selling Northeast Ice Arena, it is not at the expense of any sheet of ice. I think that one thing we need to make sure of is the amount of pieces of ice that we have are very important to the community. And although we don't want to react emotionally, I think that needs to be a priority of this budget cycle, that we need to try and figure out a sustainable solution of what we lose, what we gain from the ice, not only the community ice rinks we have, but also the current ice rinks. And I think that needs to be clarified. I also want to make sure that we're consistently considering our public bathrooms and those basic infrastructures. I agree with my fellow commissioners that we need to maintain what we have and make sure that we're providing that need, that basic necessity to the community. I had another thing or two, but I'll wait.
Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. It seems we have a lot of agreement here. I also agree with Commissioner Musich about the things that we've tried to bring online and to keep that. And I do support our ice skating rinks. I mean, maybe we all have different reasons as to why we do, but I think that it's very clear that it's important to constituents. And I would really, it's just such a lovely thing to have in the city of Minneapolis, and I would hate to lose it or even minimize it, because I know if we save one rink but not a different one, then neighborhoods feel, less than here and there. So that's important to me. And then I also thought, I know we just opened Graco, and Commissioner Elper had mentioned it as well, and I think it might be something to consider is trying to minimize extra things that we bring online that I know are in the pipeline. I'm not trying to say that it would be easy to do, but things that maybe haven't been built yet that we wouldn't have to staff, or we wouldn't have to build out, that maybe we had wanted to in a more robust economy, that we should look at those things. So thank you so much.
Commissioner Menz.
Sorry, I remember what I was. I also want us to really reconsider and remember that when we did get our $2.6 million investment from the city, and what the previous board, what we sort of set on a track was we hired all people, and I'm not necessarily sure that was the long-term best way. We could have been adding on people, and that might be a lesson learned to not ramp up too quickly, because now it's challenging to figure out what to do if we have excess in those positions, and making sure that the positions we did hire, the new ones, are bringing in the programming that we need them to bring in, and maybe examining how maybe there are some positions that we need to evaluate. And that's unfortunate that we have to look at those, but we also have to correct mistakes of, possibly past budget cycles. I think we need to be brave enough to examine those things and really make sure that we're evaluating where we might have some waste or some overlap.
Commissioner Olson for a second time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the first time on this one, but I would agree with Musich on the youth fee structure and trying to maintain that as we go into that and kind of optimize that. I think that's something that's important to me. And yeah, maintenance and kind of the planning around that, and the kind of data visualization where we know it saves us in future years. That's important, right? Because if we cut now, that will hurt us later. And yeah, I mean, ice rinks. I think ice rinks. It's only a priority for me if we can kind of show that it's objectively more used, truly more important and cost efficient than other programs and other services that we provide. Obviously, there's been a big outcry around that, but that's also because it's one of the major things that we had to reduce recently, right? Who knows if we had chosen something else, if there would be an even bigger outcry. So it's just would want to look at that a little further. And so that's just, I know I'm in the minority on that, but that's my minority report there.
Okay, I'll just say that one thing that am proud about serving with this board is I think that we've done things in pretty good balance. I don't think that we've prioritized, so we've brought up some of the environmental staffing, but not at the expense of youth. We know those are important things that need to function together. And so whatever we do, I think also needs to sort of maintain the balance and the gains of the balance. At least maybe that's a subjective view that it's in balance, but it does feel like we've done that. The other thing I'm gonna bring up is the Diamond Sports TAC, for example. There really, to me, seems to be, I mean, I know that we've done a lot of work, and I know it's a tremendous amount of effort to do something like that. But really, there are some follow-up items from that related to essentially standards, creating the tiered fields, but also looking again now at your facilities, your facility plan essentially for Diamond Sports, and maybe there are a couple of diamonds that could be decommissioned. That wouldn't be free to do, but it shows that maybe underutilized facility assets might be able to be coming offline. The reason I bring that up is that we do have the other tax, and I think the ice or winter tax, I don't know if it's gonna yield the information that we need now, but it sure would be helpful in understanding any ice decommissioning or reconfiguration. The man that spoke at the Matthews location about that rink, he talked about a different configuration of whatever ice is made in that location. So I think that if we take that approach of a TAC, an advisory committee approach to these facilities, doing facility studies like this, and finding the places that we reasonably can decommission with community engagement, that'll give us, I think, make me feel a little bit better about the choices we might be making in that regard. But I also do think that that is an iconic aspect, the rinks particularly are an iconic feature of Minneapolis, because we have so much winter, and not a lot of cities have that, so, yeah. Okay, that's it for me on that one. Let's go ahead to question number 3. Are there any cuts in the 2025 approved budget or the proposed 26 budget that you would want to have reconsidered? Commissioner Alper.
Yeah, thanks. So I realize I might be backtracking, but I thought it would be, in terms of number 2, I'm very interested in protecting staffing and the gains that we made there in the citywide youth program sliding fee. So apologies for making you write like that, but I just didn't want to have President Abeni calling on me twice. And then regarding things that I think we can cut, potentially, I mean, it's a really hard decision, but I agree with Commissioner Thompson that, like Graco, Upper Harbor, rethinking some of our immediate term, and that's for number 3, the cuts in the 2025 approved budget or the proposed 2026 budget. I think those are things that we should rethink, because I think we have an obligation to serve the residents that are being served now by our services, and not just these future more ambitious plans. I think now we got to think about the present now. I guess that's my sense. And I just want to say, since we're on ice rinks, the Trust for Public Land touted our equity metrics as one of the reasons that I read in Superintendent Bangora's email to us on why we got that designation, and which is awesome and incredible. And I gotta say, I don't think they were taken into account with the ice rink decision. And that is my main piece where I feel like we as a board let down our residents. And so that's my ask, not to say that we need to like save one particular rink over another because we have an outcry, but we need to do this in a manner that is objective, that does, lay out the options on the table and is transparent, because otherwise we're pitting one community against the other. And I guess that's what I would say about any of these cuts that are being proposed. We need to have a really thoughtful rationale for why we're picking on some versus others. And there are always going to be reasons, but people don't want you to think that you just chose, you're just like, oh, we got to do something. I'll just, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. We shouldn't be like the school board when they picked a District 3 candidate when they flipped a coin. We shouldn't flip a coin over these cuts because these are serious cuts.
I want to hear about that sometime. Commissioner Menz.
I lost my train of thought because Commissioner Alpert had such great points.
Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I would just kind of add my voice to the whole pausing Graco and Upper Harbor. You know, I don't want to add new stuff, right? And I know we kind of have this manifest destiny to build up the river and go along the river because, you know, it kind of helps with some of our metrics and ratings and things like that. But I think I'd rather take a pause on that. And yeah, you know, I don't know. Yeah, and kind of to, I guess, Commissioner Alpert's point, you know, when we also reduced, you know, rec center hours, which, you know, I have gotten some constituents reaching out about that. But it's kind of more diffuse in some ways, so it hasn't galvanized quite like the ice rinks. And so as kind of to your point of it just, if it's kind of felt everywhere a little, it's better than feeling in certain places a lot. So, I mean, obviously I want to go back and I wish we had the money and stuff to make our rec hours back to their full slot there. But maybe there's a lesson there, right, in that rec hour, because certainly that's still affecting probably as many people, if not more people, than the ice rinks, as far as numerically. But it's just, it hasn't created quite that hubbub. So, I don't know, just a thought there.
Commissioner Menz.
Sorry for my flakiness. Thank you. And Commissioner Olson, I've also heard that, and it is very diffused, right? It's not as like a strong. I also want to make sure, I know we had to reduce the budget of the Indigenous Park Liaison, but put it into and like making sure that we're continuing that relationship building work with our communities and tribes and making, like, I want to make sure that we're prioritizing those things in our budget as well.
Okay. I don't know that I agree about Graco and Upper Harbor Terminal with my colleagues, because again, that's tied to growth of the city. And I think it also shows the future-oriented look of the park board, which is an important thing too. So I don't know. See, this is not easy, but I don't think I agree with that. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you. Speaking toward that, I think all of these things are extremely challenging to even talk about. And that there are a lot of parks in my district that are supposed to be coming online and have big price tags, right? And not only the price tag of building it, but then the staffing involved. And I also would state with some level of confidence that my constituents would prefer to make sure that, you know, their rec centers stay open or their ice rinks stay up, and have that be paused for a year or two. I mean, I'm brainstorming out loud, right? And so that's why I think it's a challenging thing to think about, but I don't even know how much it would save us in terms of money. I just know that there are staffing positions, and rather than, you know, potentially losing a staff member who's already here through attrition or some other form, you know, just don't budget for those new programs, is I guess was my thought process in mentioning it. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and you had some agreement. Commissioner Schaefer.
Well, I just wanted a clarification. I thought that we did not receive our full Graco amount from our previous year, and we went ahead and opened, but maybe I was misreading that, or we opened just partially. Obviously, we did partial open.
President DeBenny, Commissioner Schaefer, thank you for that question. I was actually going to try to follow up at the end. So we are partially open with some stretch of downtown programming funding into that space, some stretch of funding related to the North Commons pool not opening this year. So there's There are some small pockets of money that are help stretching that, but I also wanted to say that the team who is working there right now is really bringing on a very entrepreneurial model and looking primarily at how to do a model around revenue from rentals and other things. So they're already leaning into that as the way to keep it open. And they're focusing on, they're open Wednesday through Sunday. They're trying to be there at the optimal times into the evenings when people will be needing the restrooms and things like that. So they're taking the very small bit of money they have, trying to stretch it with rentals, and then trying to target the hours to when they anticipate the folks will be there the most.
Great, and I think that does mirror, this no expansion of services previously in the 2008 to 12 theme. If we don't get the revenue in our property tax increase, I think it's good for leadership to sit in that effect of that decision in some ways, because it affects all of us.
Yes, I hear that. It's just that the building now exists, so that's the problem. Okay, I'm going to go ahead to question number 4, advice to staff on service level reduction option development. What advice?
And it's okay if there's nothing more. We just wanted to make sure that if you had anything you couldn't say up until this point, you had a moment to slot that in.
Okay, Commissioner Thompson.
I'll just say one thing. I know from the 2008-2012, I'm gonna guess, I was living here for part of the time, not the whole time. I moved back in 2010. That somehow lifeguarding got way cut back and at the beaches, and I know that we never really returned to that, and I would really caution that we not cut back on that just because it keeps our lakes safe. Even speaking of Graco, this is different to the topic of staffing it, but there's a beach at Graco, and even just looking at the picture of it recently, I think it's on when it was on one of the slides, I get a little nervous because I'm like, people see sand near water, they're gonna wanna swim. So I would really love to try to keep our lifeguard staff as much as we can.
Commissioner Menz.
I'd also like, thank you, President Benny. I'd also like to make sure that we examine what the rec center staff and what we can do in those rec centers around, especially around like you said, the athletic skill development. Well, why can't we provide that programming from our staff and then see how that works, how we get revenue, and seeing if we can have staff be available to coach and do some of the things that maybe volunteers do at times, but how do we expand the role of those workers in the rec centers? And that might not be a service level reduction, but maybe just an expanded role. Commissioner
Olson?
Yeah, and I guess, probably another dissenting opinion here, but, I think, when we looked at the budget and we looked at kind of wages, I think it was, like operations and environment was like by far the largest category. And so so that's kind of environmental management. I guess I would be more okay with environmental stuff taking a little bit of a back seat. I know there's so many important issues of maintaining our natural environment that we were finally kind of getting caught up on. I mean, not even, but, starting down that path. I don't know, when I think about, our park system, I guess I think about immediate human needs first. I know having a healthy environment, there's certainly a lot of stuff there. But if I had to choose something, I think I would be okay with that. But obviously if we can avoid it, that would be best.
So I think then I'll just close this part and just say, I think you've heard maybe as objective as possible, spread out as much as possible, and transparent. So we have time, because I think the ice rinks hit us pretty suddenly, and we didn't really have much information on those, so we couldn't answer questions. So that's that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Director Wiseman.
Okay, President Benny and Commissioners, if you guys will just bear with me for probably 5 to 10 more minutes. The first few slides I'll kind of whisk through because it's history type stuff that you've all seen and heard multiple times. So, of course, we're talking about the Board of Estimate and Taxation and setting the maximum property tax levy. It's required by law. Here we have 81% of our general fund for 2025 is funded through property taxes. We are almost 18% of the total city tax, but we are 8 cents on the dollar for each dollar that is paid in property taxes. So we all know what a great value our park system is, and I think that's reflected on this dollar bill quite well. You had the presentation from the assessors so that you know that residential property owners are going to feel the impact of property taxes this year more so than any other category. Our property tax summary, you've also seen this. We've had this conversation at the last budget retreat. You'll see this highlighted item in the second half of the chart. And this is a City of Minneapolis General Fund overhead fee increase. We actually had a meeting with city staff at 3 o'clock this afternoon to discuss this increase, and I think we made a little bit of progress, but I don't think any of the park board staff that left that room had really warm, fuzzy feelings that they were gonna decrease this increase. And then we also have a Workday, the new financial system that will be coming into play as well. So it only makes the issue worse. So we have been operating under a 2026 plan of a 6.33% property tax levy increase. With this increase in the overhead fee and potentially Workday, we're now looking at a 7.77% property tax levy increase. And our gap between what the city is recommending for us and what our needs are has grown to almost $6 million. So with that, I would like to get some input from the commissioners around how you're feeling about a park board maximum property tax levy request and what range you would be comfortable in. Again, that will be the next kind of major decision point that this board will make in July. You will have to pass a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation set the maximum property tax levy for the park board. And I'll open it up.
Thank you. Before I take questions or we go to questions, I just want to ask probe a little bit more detail on the city overhead fee increase.
Yes.
So I'm aware of just some of the items in there. So from the meeting today is there still the fee for the 311 services, for example?
President and Benny and commissioners, that was quite the percentage of the fee that they wanted to charge us for 311 was quite exorbitant. I think that the staff person that created that fee maybe had some misinformation about how interactive we are with the city's 311 system. So we did provide some background on that, and they're gonna for sure look at that one.
Okay, so they're looking at it,
yeah.
but you didn't have any warm fuzzies. So what was the 311 fee historically? Do you know how much you paid?
We haven't paid for 311.
And it was going to be now the
$502,000.
So it went from $0 to over $500,000 for the calendar year 2026. When the amount that they've also already suppressed the amount down to 0.37% or 1.38% of our general fund, our property tax increase, levy increase. So those are the kinds of things that are coming to the park board, and there's not a lot of opportunity other than the meetings that you can have with the staff, but there's not a lot of, we don't hold a lot of cards to say no, right? Okay, so what kind of questions do people have, or Commissioner Thompson?
Thank you. I have a question about that. So 311, which is a city service, they now randomly decided to charge us $500,000 for people, residents to call in, just to clarify, to get information about the parks. Is that correct? Do I have that correct?
President Benny and Commissioner Thompson, I think they feel, or that they had communication, the staff person that put together had communications from the 311 staff that they field a lot of park board calls. And what we communicated to them is that we don't think that the staff have a full understanding about the service level redesign that happened, and with parkway lighting and parkway potholes being a city public works call, not a park board call. So I think it's a combination of several things, but they went through all the city services. They identified the city services that they didn't feel the park board utilized, and then they wanted to charge us for the city services that they feel we do utilize, and 311 had popped up into that we utilize 311. And I think right now the city and park board kind of disagree as to what level 311 is used for park board.
Wow, that is shocking to me that they would do that, honestly. And I have so many thoughts that I will keep most of them in my head for the moment. This gap, this is a new gap, the 5.7 million, that's a new gap from the last couple of weeks, from this conversation today, almost?
President Benny and Commissioner Thompson, at the April 30th budget retreat, our gap was almost $1.3 million less. The change is this increase to the general fund overhead fee.
Got it.
It adds to our deficit.
So, just to clarify this one more time, the City of Minneapolis general fund overhead increase, that's all stuff they're charging us?
Correct. And that's an increase. So last year, we paid 1.3 million. They want to charge us 2.6 million.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm not gonna go off on this, so I will yield my time. Thank you.
Okay, while lowering the increase. Okay, Commissioner Menz.
Yeah, can you help me understand? So I'm looking at the debt that we pay right now, the debt service. I mean, that would still be that wouldn't be general fund. That's going to be enterprise. That's not going to affect this. Thanks.
That's it?
I'm sorry.
That's it?
Okay. Vice President Musich.
Thank you, President Benny. So I think it would help my colleagues if you could, so we think we need 7.77% levy increase of our budget. And the city is saying of our budget, they think we only need 1.37. Okay. And how much of that 7.77 is the new 1.6 million or whatever the number is in their increased fee for us?
So So the top of the chart shows the city of Minneapolis increase. So a 1.37% increase would equate to $1.2 million. So that full increase would go directly back to the city of Minneapolis.
So essentially, we have to lay people off so that we can pay the city more money? I mean,
Yes.
okay. So if we're gonna be paying them an additional $500,000 to take calls about all the lights that they haven't fixed for a year and a half on parkways, are they gonna be putting that money into the lighting fund to actually solve the problem that's causing all those calls? Did they mention, like, what their plan is there in the meeting today?
President and Benny and Commissioner Musich, this is a general fund overhead fee to support the general fund services. So, it's,
And is Public Works part of their general fund?
Parts of it. Parts of it.
it's parts of it.
Okay. I mean, I guess I too am not having warm fuzzies about that. It just feels, it feels not great. So I think we'll need to all be having some conversations with our colleagues on the city council, just about what our needs are. Because I think, you know, their constituents are our constituents, and I think they really value the parks. And if we're not able to provide what we need, and it's partially because of fees to the same government that's serving them,
Not well.
yeah, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, so, and I think, so I'm glad people are seeing what I also see. And so, but we should make sure we also are answering Director Wiseman's question, but I'll call on Commissioner Alper.
Yeah, so could you restate your question, just for the benefit of everybody?
Sure. President and Benny, Commissioner Elper, and Commissioners, I would like to know what range you would be willing to set your maximum property tax levy request at for 2026.
Great. So as I see it, we have two issues before us tonight to answer your question. I mean, first of all, I do agree that that's the issue of the overhead increase is a big deal, and so strategizing about what we all can do as commissioners and as the park board, I'm on board to try to mitigate that, because it just cancels out the top part. So right there. But I do think another thing to answer your question directly, like setting that aside for a moment. I mean, I feel like every other day I hear now about companies doing significant reductions of staff or downsizing or layoffs. And so I think we should tread very cautiously this year in light of what is impending and what, I mean, we've talked about it very openly at budget retreats now about pre-planning for a recession. And so I just think that we also need to be more on the cautious side is what I would say. And I don't have an exact percentage here. Well, I think it would be good to, like, if that line that I'm just pointing to, the highlighted line, were to go away, I think it would be good to look at, perhaps after this meeting, you could send out the, what we saw last time with the scenarios. That'd be great, and then I can, maybe we could talk next. Maybe there could be a time at our next meeting, just a quick item on next Wednesday to go over that.
Okay, Commissioner Olson.
Yeah, just ditto, obviously, colleague frustration on all this. I mean, particularly looking at the wages and stuff, and that's something that was kind of weighed in on, and part of the promise of standing by kind of our workers is funding that. But as to a percentage, I think if you're looking for like a city total increase, I think, I do think it's possible, it's reasonable that we can meet somewhere, maybe not in the middle, but 75% of the way. So as like a city total increase, around 1% or something, or for NPRB percent increase, maybe around, 5, 5, 6 or something, and then we can work hard to kind of find more, not efficiencies, I guess, in places to cut. So I think, I don't know, and I know we're not gonna get all the way, so and I know also our constituents are kind of feeling a lot of pain, and we know that it's gonna start compounding on folks' property taxes. And so I don't think we can necessarily justify going full, even with ourselves. So, yeah, 1% maybe.
Commissioner Schaefer.
Yes, I'll just give my feedback by going line item by line item. I mean, the first one for wages, this is what we committed to our workers. This is what the city had committed to their staff. We were following their example. I think we need to support that. Absolutely, the first one. Second one, I think that's new state mandate. We have to do that. We have to plan for that, right? Inflation, goods and services, maybe that can come down a little bit just to show some good effort. But obviously, that's been a hard one for us, right? That's reduces our purchasing power. I think this highlighted one, that has to change. That's just a no-brainer. And the last one, I think we'll have to take that one out. So these last two, if we took those two out, what would our percentage be roughly? Just ballparking it. Would it be 4%, 3%? 5%. Still, that's still, it is still hefty, right? So that's my feedback.
My feedback is that we should ask for 7.77%. And if they don't want to do that, that they need to reduce that, take it down to 0 increase, or they can maybe get whatever percentages we're getting on inflation of goods and services. Are we getting 3% in our line item? Then they can get a 3% increase on their admin fee, but they can't get 100% increase on their admin fee. So I say 7.77% is what we have as a starting point, with a glaring yellow box saying that's why. So that's what I would say. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So with that, I guess it did say, we said Commissioner, I think we're done. Closing remarks, Al Bangora, Superintendent, is that right?
No, to say.
President Benning, Commissioners, thank you very much. Very productive, and I can't express the gratitude for this board, the work. I said before, when I opened up in this conversation, that we will be successful in navigating through this. It's going to happen, right? Our park system, what we do every day is challenging, and we do great work, and we'll get there. This is going to be a real challenge. There's no question, but I will say gratitude to this incredible staff that's here. They do amazing work. I'm very fortunate to be working with them. I can't say enough about these folks. They're just incredible professionals, competent, and really absolutely amazing. I want to say that to them so they hear it, and to the general public, but also to this board, that I'm very honored to be working with you, and I really appreciate your thoughtfulness, and I just wanted to say thank you to you all. And I think that as we work through this, we will do our work, and I know that President Benny knows this, and Vice President Usage, that we're working hard. We're talking to the mayor, we're working with our staff, and we will continue to do that. So again, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it, and look forward to our further conversations and the work that we have to do going forward to get the resources we need for our organization to continue the great work that we do for our constituents. So thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much, Superintendent, and thank you to my colleagues here. We went a little long, and yeah, as Vice President Musich said, if you have relationships with your council members or others, feel free to reach out and just let them know what's happening. With that, I'll adjourn the meeting.